Hey guys, tonight we're taking a walk down a place so notorious, so soaked in despair and juniper fumes. It got its own painting and a permanent reputation for public drunkenness, toothless smiles, and one particularly haunting image of a woman casually dropping her baby down a stairwell. Welcome to Gin Lane. You've probably seen the woodcut, ragged buildings, starving people, skeletal figures passed out mid-step, all while the gin keeps flowing. And yes, spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this era. Between the dysentery, lead poisoning, and everyone casually drinking enough spirits to kill a small horse, things are bleak. Entertaining, definitely, but very, very bleak. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not holding your gin-soaked baby hostage or anything. Also, drop your city and time in the comments. I want to know who's crawling into bed with Georgian nightmares tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in London around the 1730s, and the first thing that hits you isn't the noise, it's the smell. Smoke, sweat, sewage, boiled cabbage, horse dung, and the acrid sweetness of cheap gin all swirl in the air like a punch to the face. The streets are muddy and chaotic, choked with hawkers yelling nonsense, children barefoot in the muck, and women stumbling past with babies strapped to their backs, or in some unfortunate cases no baby at all. You dodge a cart loaded with barrels of something unlabelled, probably gin, and make your way down to St Giles, the beating, bleary heart of what would become known as Gin Lane. It's not an actual lane with a street sign. It's a metaphorical title for the urban decay and debauchery hitting the city like a tidal wave. You pass narrow alleyways so tight you could high-five someone inside their home, and wooden buildings leaning at odd angles like they're half-drunk themselves. No zoning laws here, just generations of chaos built on top of older, smellier chaos. At one corner a woman sells oysters next to a stall selling socks. It doesn't matter. You're distracted by the main event. A hunched old man with 6 teeth and one eye pouring something clear from a cracked bottle into little tin cups. He has customers, lots of them. Some pay with coins, others with buttons, and a few offer services that don't bear repeating here. Everyone's drinking this stuff like it's holy water. They call it Madame Geneva, but don't let the elegant name fool you. It's mostly grain alcohol cut with turpentine or sulfuric acid, cheap, flammable, and guaranteed to knock your sense of direction out cold. Gin isn't new in the 1730s London. It's been here since the late 1600s, when British soldiers came back from the Netherlands, slightly drunk and very enthusiastic about this juniper-based spirit called Geneva. It was medicinal, they said. Helped digestion. Cured the plague, maybe. Fast forward a few decades, and thanks to some cosy legislation encouraging British distillation over imported booze, gin is suddenly cheaper than beer and exponentially more potent. You're living in a time where water will probably kill you, beer is taxed, and gin costs less than a loaf of bread. As you press deeper into the neighbourhood, you spot the signs of a full-blown gin epidemic. A toddler lies curled in a doorway, sucking on a gin-soaked rag like it's a pacifier. Nearby, 2 boys, maybe 7 or 8, are arguing over who gets the last drop from a shared bottle. Their mother is slumped beside them, either unconscious or trying very hard to ignore reality. You slip into a low-ceilinged tavern, though tavern is generous. It's more of a lean-to with a dirt floor and the distinct scent of wet dog. No menu. Just one big jug of mystery liquid behind the counter. You take a cautious sip and your entire throat lights on fire. Is that pepper or turpentine? Hard to tell. But one thing's certain. This isn't for flavour, it's for oblivion, and that's the draw. The gin craze isn't about fun or rebellion, it's about erasure. People drink to forget how many of their children have died, how little money they make, and how many rats are currently sharing their bed. Work is brutal, pay is unreliable, and the average lifespan is depressingly short. Gin offers a warm fog to disappear into. For a few pence you can forget everything, even if it costs you your sanity or, your liver. Here's a historical fact for tonight. Between 1720 and 1751, gin consumption in England more than doubled. By 1743, the country was drinking over 2.2 gallons of gin per person per year, and that includes the children and the clergy. And yes, they were drinking too. Let's not kid ourselves. A fringe detail for your pillow. One infamous gin hawker was known to pour shots directly into infants' mouths to keep them quiet. Babies, drinking gin, on purpose. And it wasn't even the weirdest thing happening on a given Tuesday. Of course, not everyone agrees on just how bad things were. Scholars today still argue whether the gin craze was truly an out-of-control social disaster, or mostly a moral panic hyped by the upper classes and Protestant reformers. After all, many of the more gruesome stories come from pamphlets and propaganda woodcuts designed to scare people straight, or at least sober. So were people really dropping babies into basements, or was that 18th century clickbait? It doesn't matter to you right now because you're currently watching a man try to pay for more gin with a dead rat. The vendor laughs, slaps him on the back, and takes it. What he plans to do with it, you don't want to know. As the sun sets, Gin Lane comes alive. It's loud, sticky, and teetering on the edge of riot. Fights break out in the mud. Dogs bark. A violin plays something unrecognisable in the distance. Someone throws up near your shoe. Welcome to the Georgian underworld. You'll fit right in once you stop coughing. You wake up the next morning, or at least it feels like morning. There's no clock, just a faint grey light seeping through a gap in the shutters and the low moan of someone vomiting in the street. Your mouth is dry. Your head pulses like someone's hammering your skull with a pewter tankard. You're lying on what passes for a bed, a lumpy sack stuffed with straw, maybe old rags. There's a sour smell rising from it, equal parts sweat, mildew, and something disturbingly like pickled onions. Your fingers are stained, your knees are scraped, and your memory is full of blank pages. You went out for just a sip, and here you are, fully marinated in Georgian ruin. You sit up and try to piece together how a once medicinal spirit turned into this city's biggest obsession. The gin, if it can still be called that, was never meant to flood every corner of London. Originally, it really did have noble intentions, genuinely used as a remedy in 17th century Dutch medicine, flavoured with juniper to mask the bitter taste of inferior alcohol. But once British soldiers brought it back from the continent, it got a full local makeover, distilled fast, dirt cheap, and with none of that pesky quality control. It became the drink of the poor, which also made it the drink of choice for those most in need of forgetting. And the government? Oh, they encouraged it. In the early 1700s, the Crown wanted to boost the grain trade and undercut the French brandy market. They practically begged people to distill at home. If you had a tub, some barley, and a vague disregard for human life, you could make gin. No license needed, no taxes, no inspection. So everyone did. Housewives, farmers, bakers, even barbers. London turned into one giant moonshine operation, where the question wasn't who's drinking, but who's not. You shuffle outside and lean against a crooked wall. A woman waddles past holding a teacup. Not for tea, of course, but filled with gin. It's not unusual. In fact, it's downright fashionable. Gin is everywhere, not just in cups, but in soup ladles, milk bottles, hollowed out loaves of bread. If it holds liquid, it's been turned into a gin delivery system. You once saw someone drinking it from a shoe. You thought it was a joke. It wasn't. The obsession is hard to overstate. It cuts across every layer of society. But in these streets, among the working class and the utterly destitute, it's more than a habit. It's a way to survive. You overhear two men talking about their day's pay and whether they can afford supper or a pint. They laugh. Supper never wins. Gin warms the belly faster and costs less. One of them has no shoes, the other has no teeth. You imagine they've made this same choice 1,000 times. Here's a hard fact to consider while your hangover simmers. By 1730, over 7,000 gin shops operated in London alone. That's not counting unlicensed street vendors or the folks selling it out of their front doors. That's more gin outlets than there were bakeries or butchers. You could go blind before you went hungry, and some did. Because much of this stuff wasn't just alcohol, it was poison with a marketing team. And here's the fringe detail of the day. Distillers sometimes added oil of vitriol, sulfuric acid, to give the illusion of higher strength. Other popular ingredients included turpentine, sawdust, and even spirit of juniper made from soaking used gin bottles in water and selling the rinse. One woman famously marketed her homemade concoction as Lady's Delight, though most customers ended up with paralysis rather than pleasure. Still, you get it. You really do. Life in the Georgian era is one long exercise in discomfort. The work is back-breaking, the weather is foul, and your chances of dying in a fire, a plague, or a duel are uncomfortably high. Clean water is rare. Heating is a luxury. Dental care is conceptual. You've seen people drink gin with all their front teeth missing, smiling like broken pianos, and they still look happier than the sober ones. There's an older man slumped near a stoop who locks eyes with you. His coat is more whole than fabric, and his hands shake from what looks like withdrawal. Or maybe just the cold. Used to drink ale, he mumbles. Then gin came. Cheaper, faster, doesn't leave you time to remember things you don't want to. You nod politely, you want to walk away, but you also don't. And here's where the scholarly debate kicks in. Was this full-scale social collapse, or are the historians exaggerating? Some argue that the gin craze is more myth than fact, an overblown moral panic whipped up by the upper classes to justify crackdowns on the lower ones. After all, no one was painting hysterical woodcuts about the aristocracy passing out on brandy in their parlours. Yet here we are, watching artist William Hogarth immortalise the poor in grotesque scenes of neglect and decay. Maybe it's propaganda, maybe it's accurate. The truth, as usual, is probably somewhere sticky in the middle. By mid-afternoon, the streets are humming again. Market stalls creak open. Children swarm around a mangy dog chewing on an old boot. And the gin? Still flowing. A woman with a tray strapped to her chest walks by, offering breakfast gin for a halfpenny a shot. A cluster of labourers are already a few deep before noon. You catch one stumbling as he tries to lift a sack of coal and nearly topples into a trough. His boss laughs. Better drunk than dead, he mutters. You're not sure he's wrong. You've begun to understand that gin isn't just a drink here. It's a cultural force, a form of rebellion, a quiet cry for mercy in a world that gives none. It fuels the grief, the grind, the grinding poverty. It's not about pleasure anymore. It's about escape. You take another sip, even though your body screams not to. It burns going down. But for a moment, just a moment, you feel warm again. The next day, or maybe it's the same day, time is slippery here. You find yourself drawn to the strange cast of characters making a living off the city's thirst. Not the ones stumbling around with glazed eyes and bruised knees, but the sly, sharp ones. The entrepreneurs of the Georgian underworld, the gin sellers. There's no proper storefront, no glowing neon sign saying gin here. Just people with carts, makeshift booths, or sometimes nothing more than an apron and a grin. The city's practically oozing with them. You pass a woman standing beside a washtub filled with something cloudy and suspiciously pink. She calls it Mother's Helper. You don't ask what's in it, and frankly, you don't want to know. She hands out ladles of it for a penny, 2 if you want it clean. Though judging by the colour of the ladle, clean is a flexible term. One particularly energetic seller operates out of an old baby carriage. She's pushing it through the crowd, ringing a handbell and shouting, "Penny a cup, 2pence if you want to remember your name tomorrow." You watch a young boy stagger up and pay with what looks like a pigeon feather. She shrugs, pours him a sip and pushes off again. That's the kind of economy you're dealing with here. People barter for gin with anything. Buttons, bones, scraps of cloth, half a potato. And the sellers? They don't care. They're not in it for civic pride. They're in it because demand is endless, and the law is mostly uninterested unless it's time to make a public example of someone. Until then, it's open season. The vendors themselves range from grim to absurd. You meet a man named Silky Tom, who sells medicinal spirits from under a stained cloak. He insists on using a silver teaspoon to serve each dose. Very classy. Though his gin tastes like mothballs soaked in nail polish. Another character, called Peg-Leg Nell, has a peg made from a hollowed wooden flask. She pours shots directly from it, one smooth tip forward, as if offering her own body to the cause of national inebriation. Gin has no single demographic, and neither do the sellers. Some are elderly women in bonnets too tired to care if their gin is more water than spirit. Others are little more than children themselves, orphans who figured out early that the best way to survive was to keep others drunk enough to forget about them. They're everywhere, lurking in alleyways, outside workshops, even around churches, hawking their holy water to the miserable and the hopeful alike. There's one infamous gimmick you hear about again and again, gin in baby bottles. A horrifying blend of business and tragedy. Vendors would give gin to infants to keep them quiet while their mothers worked, or just stared off, hollowed out by grief. Some sellers leaned into this practice, openly offering bottles fitted with rags or corks, advertising their product as suitable for all ages. You see a woman do just that, handing over a bottle to a toddler barely able to stand. The child takes a wobbly sip and sits down in the dirt, eyes glassy, unnervingly calm. This isn't an anomaly, it's a system. It runs on desperation, thrives in poverty, and dresses itself up in false promises. The sellers are part villain, part victim. Many are addicts themselves, selling by day and drinking by night. You talk to one who's lost 4 fingers to frostbite but still runs a tiny stall beside a tannery. He admits he drinks more than he sells. "At least I know mine's clean," he says, raising a grimy jar. You don't ask what clean means to him. You already know the standards here are generous. A historical fact for this stroll through the haze: gin was so ubiquitous that some sellers offered drip gin for the especially poor. That's the leftover residue scraped from used gin glasses, poured back into a communal jug and sold for a fraction of a penny. It was warm, it was cloudy, it was technically alcohol, and it was very, very popular. Here's a fringe one for your collection. One notorious gin seller used to paint a fake bishop's mitre on the wall of his home and serve sacramental gin to parishioners on Sundays. Customers knelt, whispered confessions, and left 3 sheets to the wind with a vague sense of divine forgiveness. Religious blasphemy? Absolutely. But business was booming. Still, not all gin sellers are shady. Some genuinely believe they're offering relief. A widow you meet in Spitalfields tells you that her stand, just a plank of wood and a cracked jug, is the only way she can support her 5 children. She waters her gin down, refuses to serve anyone already falling over, and tries to steer younger kids away with bits of hard bread. "They'll get it somewhere else if not here," she says softly. "At least I try to keep it from killing them." Her eyes are bloodshot, her hands tremble, but her voice is steady. She believes she's doing what she must, and in Georgian London, that's pretty much all anyone's doing. You sit by a wall and watch the rhythm of the trade. Sellers shout, customers haggle, someone passes out face first into the gutter. A constable walks by and pretends not to notice, unless someone's foolish enough to be loud about it. The law doesn't like noise. The law likes quiet vice, easier to ignore. Which brings us to the scholarly debate of this section. Were gin sellers really the villains they were made out to be, or just products of their time, playing the only cards they had? Some historians argue that demonising them was a way for society to ignore the systemic poverty that made gin so attractive in the first place. If you blame the vendor, you don't have to blame the landlord, the employer, or the crown. Neat, isn't it? As the sun fades, the sellers pack up their carts and cradles, their wheelbarrows and wash basins. A few stay open into the night, especially the ones near the shipyards, where labourers stumble out in need of something strong and fast. You think about how much money you've seen change hands today. Not much, but enough. Enough to keep the sellers coming back, enough to keep the city drowning in its own addiction. You step away from the crowd and take a deep breath. It smells like smoke, sweat, and juniper. You've stopped noticing the stink. That's the real warning sign. Word count 1087, awaiting continue. Section 4. You wake up in the straw again. At least you think it's straw. It might be hay, or rags. There's definitely something moving in it. Could be a rat, could be your imagination. You're not in a bed so much as a designated corner of the room where drunk people are politely shoved until they stop groaning. Your mouth tastes like the inside of a burnt boot. Your stomach is turning over like it's looking for the exit. Someone nearby is softly weeping, and someone else is singing a hymn in the wrong key. You sit up slowly, and the room spins as if you've personally offended gravity. This is your introduction to the full-body horror of a Georgian hangover. It's not just a headache. It's not just dry mouth. It's more like waking up after being trampled by livestock while someone seasoned your insides with chalk dust and fire. You cough once and taste something metallic. You've got a deep bruise on your forearm you don't remember earning, and your clothes are slightly damp with something you hope is only gin. And to make matters worse, there's a possibility you may have said something truly unfortunate to someone last night. Possibly a magistrate. Possibly someone's grandmother. You're not sure. Around you, other victims of Madame Geneva's fury begin to stir. A man with a swollen eye and one boot groans loudly and shuffles outside, trailing a blanket like a cape. A woman across the room leans over a bucket, mutters a curse in what sounds like Welsh, and promptly falls back asleep. Everyone here has the same look. Pale, hollow, and slightly ashamed. But there's no judgment. Not here. This is the great equalizer. Everybody in this gin den has tasted the fire, and everyone pays the price in the morning. Outside, the air doesn't help. The stench of the Thames, the roasting animal fat, the perpetual haze of soot and chimney smoke, all of it hits you in the face like a second insult. You can't tell if it's morning or late afternoon. You spot a boy of about 10, already sipping from a bottle as he leans against a fence. He gives you a nod. You nod back. Misery loves company, even pint-sized company. As you walk, or stagger, through the city trying to shake the fog from your head, you begin to piece together the true cost of binging on what was essentially liquid despair. Georgian gin isn't distilled to modern standards. It's crude, fiery stuff, unregulated, often toxic, cut with whatever the seller had on hand: turpentine, sulfuric acid, oil of vitriol. The hangover is not just dehydration or regret. It's your internal organs staging a protest. Some people don't even survive it. Liver failure is common. So is sudden death by vomiting, asphyxiation, or just plain falling asleep in the wrong gutter at the wrong time. There's no real cure. Water is risky. Half the wells are contaminated. Coffee is for the rich. Tea is becoming popular, but it's expensive and, at this point, still suspiciously foreign. So the go-to cure for a hangover? More gin. Just a hair of the dog. A morning pick-me-up to dull the spike of pain. You see a woman take a swig from her flask while her toddler cries at her feet. Her hands stop shaking afterward. For a moment she looks almost peaceful. Here's a little historical truth to nurse your own headache. One popular remedy for a gin hangover in the 1730s was a mixture of burnt toast, warm ale, and a raw egg. Not shaken, not stirred, just dumped into a mug and choked down in the hopes that it would bind the humours. It did not. It mostly caused more vomiting. But people swore by it, in between convulsions. And here's a slightly more bizarre fringe fact. One pamphlet from the time claimed that applying a poultice made from vinegar and horse manure to your forehead would draw out the evil vapours of gin. You don't see anyone trying that in the alley today, but who knows what's happening behind closed doors? Desperation makes innovators of us all. Some scholars argue that the so-called hangovers of the Georgian era weren't just physical, they were existential. When your daily life is a haze of lost children, endless labour and damp, crumbling walls, the after of a gin binge isn't just about nausea, it's about the creeping return of memory, of awareness, of shame. That's the part that really hurts. The gin erases, the hangover restores. And in Georgian London, there's not much you want restored. By midday you're still foggy but more upright. You pass a group of men clustered around a bench, whispering and laughing. They're comparing hangover symptoms like battle wounds. One claims he woke up convinced he was married to a donkey. Another says he saw his dead uncle dancing in the fireplace. They laugh, but it's not joy. It's survival through absurdity. Georgian humour is dark, coarse, and oddly poetic. You'd laugh too if your liver weren't trying to quit its job. Eventually you make it back to where you started. Some half-destroyed boarding house or gin cellar. The woman running it hands you a cup of broth. It tastes like boiled shoe and despair, but it stays down. She pats your hand and mutters something about pacing yourself next time. You nod, though you know full well that next time will probably be tomorrow. You lie down again, this time on something softer. Maybe you've earned it. The room smells like spilled alcohol and mould, but at least it's quiet. You pull your coat over your head and breathe through your mouth. Your skull still throbs, your body's still punishing you. But in a twisted way, it's comforting. You're not alone. Everyone here feels like death, and tomorrow they'll all do it again. Because when gin is cheaper than food and memory hurts worse than poison, who wouldn't risk another round? You'd think, after a few nights passed out in alleyways and waking up with your tongue glued to the roof of your mouth, you'd be desperate for an upgrade. Something more refined. Somewhere with chairs, maybe. Somewhere you could drink gin like a person instead of a collapsing marionette. And that's when you hear whispers, always in half-joking, slightly envious tones, about something called a gin palace. The words alone conjure velvet curtains, chandeliers, maybe a string quartet playing while gentlemen sip from crystal glasses. So naturally, curiosity drags your sore body in search of one. Spoiler, you're about 100 years too early for that particular dream. In the 1730s and 40s, what people call gin palaces are really more like gin hovels, with slightly less mould and slightly more ambition. You finally stumble into one on Drury Lane, after asking the wrong man with the right moustache and following his wink down an alley so narrow you have to walk sideways. The building leans like it's holding its breath, and when you push open the door it creaks like a dying violin. Inside the air is warm, humid and disturbingly fragrant. Not pleasant, just fragrant. Like stale lemons, meat grease and juniper had an argument and no one won. The floor is packed dirt. The walls are streaked with soot. But hey, there are benches. Actual benches. And someone has painted a mural on the back wall. 2 cherubs holding a gin bottle like it's the Holy Grail. One of them is definitely flipping off the viewer. The clientele is a notch above what you're used to. Not high society by any means, but you see fewer children passed out under tables, and more people with shirts that have all their buttons. One woman even has gloves on. Actual gloves. You wonder briefly if she's royalty or just pretending. Either way, she's sipping gin from a cracked porcelain teacup and holding her pinky out like she means it. The bartender, or more accurately the gin man, is a wiry, cheerful fellow with exactly half his teeth and a filthy apron. He greets you like an old friend and immediately offers the house special. Gentleman's regret. You ask what's in it. He winks. You drink it anyway. It tastes like regret, yes, but also like cloves, pepper, maybe licorice. There's a hint of something medicinal, like it might cure a disease while giving you 3 new ones. Here's your historical fact to sip on while your tongue goes numb. The real gin palaces won't emerge until the 1820s and 30s as grand, gas-lit establishments designed to lure middle-class customers into drinking in style. Think etched glass, polished brass, velvet cushions, the works. But back in the Georgian era, the term is aspirational at best. If someone's mopped the floor recently, and you're not actively sharing your drink with a rodent, you've got yourself a palace. Still, there's something about these early proto-palaces, a strange mix of desperation and dignity. The gin is still cheap, still questionably legal, still enough to make your eyes cross. But here people drink it with a kind of ceremony. They sit, they converse, they pretend for a moment that they're not one missed paycheck away from sleeping in a barrel. The illusion is thin, but it's comforting. One corner of the room is occupied by a local musician who plays a fiddle with only 3 strings. His version of Green Sleeves sounds like it's being strangled by a cat, but people still tap their feet. One couple dances, badly, but enthusiastically. They laugh. Real laughter. You can't remember the last time you heard that in the lower parts of town. Gin, for all its horrors, can still do that. Create little pockets of joy in a city that mostly tries to eat you. At one point, a man gets up to tell a story. He has a theatrical flair and a twinkle in his eye. He talks about the time he sold fake gin to a group of visiting French sailors by bottling pond water and adding rose petals. They paid in coins and compliments, and one of them proposed marriage. The crowd howls. You can't help but grin. Maybe this place isn't so bad. And then, like clockwork, someone throws up behind the bar. The smell hits fast. People groan, someone makes a joke, and the barkeep mops it up with a towel that's already seen too much. This is your reminder. No matter how gussied up the walls, you're still deep in the bowels of the gin craze. No amount of murals or candlelight will change that. A fringe fact for your palace tour. Some of these establishments had tasting menus of different gin blends, with fanciful names like Maiden's Fancy or Widow's Comfort. They weren't necessarily different. They were just the same rot gut with food colouring or a drop of lemon oil, but branding works. One popular trick was to display bottles with coloured liquid in the windows to suggest sophistication, even if every bottle behind the bar held the same awful brew. There's some debate among scholars about whether these early gin establishments should be seen as proto-pubs or something darker, more like drug dens than drinking halls. Some argue they offered community and refuge to the working class. Others say they functioned like traps, sucking the last pennies from people too broken to resist. And you? Sitting here, halfway through a drink called Sleepy Devil, watching a woman paint rouge onto her cheeks using crushed beetroot and gin, you're starting to believe both things can be true at once. By the end of the night, the music fades. The candles gutter low. People file out slowly, some arm in arm, others alone. A man kisses the mural cherub on the cheek before leaving. You step outside into the cold air, your breath fogging in front of you, and realize your coat smells like old citrus and wood smoke. You're not sober, not by a long shot, but you're something else. Mellow, maybe. Blurred at the edges. The kind of calm that only comes from sitting in a place that pretends just enough to be better than it is. You look back at the leaning doorway of the Gin Palace. It's crooked, cracked, probably a health hazard. But tonight, it held you. And for Georgian London, that's luxury. You don't remember falling asleep, but you definitely remember waking up, because it happens with a jolt. your knees cramped under a crooked bench, your neck at a horrifying angle, and a faint trickle of gin-tinged drool decorating your collar. Someone nearby is humming what might be a hymn, or might just be their teeth chattering. Either way, your back aches, your head throbs, and your bladder makes its presence known with vengeful urgency. You're beginning to understand something uncomfortable. This isn't a phase, it's survival. The world outside doesn't wait. It never has. You shuffle out of the gin den just in time to watch a woman dump a chamber pot out a window. It lands with a slosh in the gutter, joining a slurry of rotting food, horse urine, and other unmentionables. The street is already thick with people dragging carts, shouting orders, and trying to sell yesterday's bread as fresh. The city is loud, chaotic, and hungry, and so are its people. You're in the middle of what might be the worst economic decade of your lifetime. Prices are rising, wages are pitiful, work is hard to find if you're male, nearly impossible if you're female, and laughable if you're a child or disabled. Factories haven't quite taken over yet, but piecework, domestic labour, and apprenticeships dominate the landscape. The hours are brutal, the pay is irregular, and most jobs leave you exhausted and sore enough to feel like you're dying before you hit 30. And that's the hopeful version. Which brings you once again back to gin. This isn't about vice, not really. It's about escape, a bitter kind of relief. You talk to a young woman sitting on a step, her baby curled against her chest, swaddled in a coat that might once have been blue. She's sipping from a tin flask slowly, mechanically. You ask her name, she says, "Doesn't matter. Got 5 minutes before I have to go scrub stairs for 6 hours. You ask what's in the flask. Courage, she says, and laughs, but her eyes are tired enough to crack glass, and she's far from alone. You see men sipping gin before heading to the docks, women with red knuckles lining up at a street stall before sunrise for a drop of liquid calm, teenagers with soot-stained faces slipping into alleys to steal a gulp between shifts at the brickworks. Children, actual children, buying and selling shots like they're candy. No one seems shocked. It's just life. Gin is breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the forgotten. Here's a hard historical truth. In this era, the poorest Londoners sometimes spent more on gin than on food. It wasn't because they were reckless. It was because gin dulled the sharpest edges of their lives. For a few pence, you could forget your hunger, warm your frozen limbs, and trick yourself into thinking, tomorrow might not be worse than today. That's a powerful drug, more powerful than any law could touch. And the fringe detail? Some employers actually paid their workers in gin. Not always formally, of course, but a little bonus here, a shared bottle there, a suggestion that the workday might go smoother with a sip. One tailor famously kept a gin hour every afternoon to boost morale. It worked until one of the apprentices stitched the sleeve of a frock coat directly to his own trousers. You pass a soup kitchen run by a church, offering thin stew and stale bread. The line is long, silent, eyes cast down. At the end of the block, a man with a cart offers a shot of gin for half the cost of the meal. His line is twice as long and twice as loud. People smile there. People joke. It's hard not to notice the contrast. The government sees what's happening, or claims to. But their solution tends to swing wildly between doing nothing and trying to control the supply with panicked laws. As far as the average drinker is concerned, the authorities are either clueless or cruel. You hear someone mutter, "They tax our ale, they ban our gin, and still wonder why we drink poison." It's not wrong. Parliament is full of men sipping sherry and writing speeches about the moral decay of the poor, all while refusing to raise wages or fix the rot in the slums. Some reformers have better intentions. They offer tea instead of gin, porridge instead of spirits, sermons instead of comfort. But good intentions don't fill stomachs or soften straw beds. You visit one of their soup societies, it smells like boiled hope. The woman ladling soup into your bowl tells you she used to drink, used to sell too. She stopped after a neighbour's baby died from withdrawal. You nod politely, say thank you, and don't mention the bottle in your coat pocket. The scholarly debate rages on centuries later. Was the working class doomed by its own choices, or pushed into a bottle by the weight of poverty and neglect? Historians argue about how widespread addiction truly was. Some say it was exaggerated by elite fearmongers looking for a scapegoat. Others insist the damage was undeniable. Crime, disease, early death, orphaned children. The truth again is blurry, like trying to remember exactly how many drinks you had last night. Enough to forget, not enough to vanish. You walk through the market and watch a woman sell off the last of her possessions. a cracked mirror, a bent spoon, a string of beads once worn proudly. She pockets the coin and immediately walks to the gin cart across the street. It's not about stupidity, it's about need. She needs something to numb the ache of loss, to fill the void left by all the things she's had to let go. And then there's you, standing in the middle of it all, shoes sticky with gutter slush, coat heavy with damp. You're not special. You're just another person trying to float in a sea that keeps rising. You reach for your flask, it's empty. You consider your options. Then you spot a familiar face, the woman with the pink teacup from the pseudo-palace, now selling her own mix from a chipped bottle. You walk over. She smiles, tired and kind, and pours you a measure. It burns. It always burns. But the cold hurts more. You wouldn't expect the rich to want in on this. After all, gin is the drink of the desperate, cheap, sharp, and full of unspoken sorrow. But Georgian England has a peculiar way of turning vice into fashion, especially once the gentry realise they can indulge without consequence. And so, as you drift from the soot-streaked alleyways into the cleaner, cobbled parts of town, you notice something odd. The smell of juniper doesn't disappear, it just changes form. You find yourself on a quieter street where the windows are clean, the carriages are polished, and the doors have knockers shaped like lion heads instead of rusted nails. Inside these homes you begin to spot a different breed of drinker. These people don't hunch over gin carts or slosh their cups in the mud. They sit in drawing rooms with velvet curtains, discussing politics and poetry, while sipping something clear and fragrant from delicate glassware. They call it pink gin, and they drink it slowly like it's made of silk and good intentions. A footman offers you a tray. The glass is chilled, the gin is infused with bitters, and there's a twist of citrus floating like a lazy leaf in a pond. You take a sip and feel both the burn and the elegance. It's still gin. But it's the kind that's been dressed for a masquerade ball, and just like that you realise the truth. The gin craze isn't confined to Gin Lane anymore. It's crept through the servants' entrances and into the parlours, wrapped itself in lace and powdered wigs. The upper classes are drinking too, just more discreetly, and with a lot more self-congratulation. They call it fashionable. They call it continental. But it's the same liquid that's killing people 10 streets over. The double standard is breathtaking. You overhear a man in a blue brocade waistcoat declare, "The poor drink because they lack virtue. We drink for taste." He says this while pouring his third glass before noon. His wife nods, lifting her own cup with a dainty tremoring hand. The difference isn't in the gin, it's in the mirrors they choose to look into. A bit of history for your elegantly furrowed brow. By the 1740s, gin had moved out of the slums and into the homes of the upper classes, but it needed a rebrand. Enter aromatics, fancy glasses, and eventually tonic water imported from British colonies. It wouldn't become truly gentlemanly until the 19th century, but the transformation started early. A few tweaks, a sprinkle of bitterness, and suddenly gin was no longer a drink for the damned, it was a mark of refined taste. But don't be fooled. Just because the rich drink with silver spoons and fancier names doesn't mean they aren't affected. You see it in the quiet tremble of hands, in the flushed cheeks behind the powder. One well-dressed woman knocks over a glass and begins weeping uncontrollably, murmuring something about a dead spaniel and too many Thursdays. Her companions ignore her delicately, the way one might ignore a breeze shifting the curtains. You get the feeling this happens often. The fringe fact of the evening. There was a short-lived trend among the aristocracy where gin was served as part of health rituals during breakfast, often paired with raw oysters, hard cheese, or pickled walnuts. One physician even recommended gin as a digestive aid for delicate ladies who couldn't handle the heaviness of meat. Unsurprisingly, many of these delicate ladies were tipsy before the noon bells rang. You're offered another drink, this one called the Morning Smile. It's light, floral, and deceptively strong. You sit politely and listen as a group of landowners discusses the gin craze among the rabble. One man shakes his head and says, "They simply have no self-control." You think about the woman you saw yesterday, shaking on a step with her baby in her lap and half a flask in her hand. You wonder what she'd say to this room full of self-satisfied drinkers who think ruin only visits through the back door. Here's where the scholars argue. Was the gin craze truly limited to the poor, or is that just the version history likes to tell? Some historians claim the upper classes were deeply involved, but kept their indulgence hidden behind closed doors and refined language. Others believe the rich merely dabbled, using gin like a passing trend before returning to their claret and port. You suspect the truth lies in the frequency of the stumbles and the looseness of their tongues. By late afternoon, the drawing room is a little too warm. The candles have burned low, and the conversations have grown louder. Someone starts playing a harpsichord in the corner, badly, and no one stops them. A man with a monocle tells a joke about a barmaid, a bishop, and a barrel of gin, and it's so wildly inappropriate that a few guests spit their drinks from laughter. Another lady fans herself and sighs, "Oh, I simply adore a naughty glass. So wicked, so wonderful." You make your excuses and step outside into the cool evening air. Your coat catches a breeze that carries the scent of coal and roasted chestnuts, and behind it, faintly, the ever-present curl of juniper. It doesn't care whether you're rich or poor, warm or hungry, it just waits. As you walk back toward the lower streets, you pass a pair of footmen leaning against a carriage, swigging from a shared flask. Their conversation drifts toward which mistress drinks more. Lady Harrow, who keeps a bottle hidden in a bookcase, or Lady Pym, who fakes fainting spells just to get another tonic. You laugh softly, unnoticed, and keep walking. Because in Georgian London, gin has no loyalty. It climbs from the gutters to the parlours, wraps itself around both silk and rags, and whispers the same promise to everyone. Just one more sip, and the pain goes quiet. The first thing you hear that morning is the sound of a child crying. It's not the loud, wailing kind that demands immediate attention. It's softer, intermittent, like a tiny cracked bell. You're walking through one of the city's shabbier lanes, which says something, because most of Georgian London is already a symphony of grime. The buildings here tilt in on each other like gossiping old women, and in their shadows life quietly falls apart in slow, gin-soaked motion. You round a corner and see her, a woman sitting on a wooden crate, knees together, arms folded, chin tucked into her chest. There's a baby beside her in a stained wool bundle, not crying anymore, just sort of quiet. Too quiet. The woman doesn't look up as you approach. She might be asleep. She might be too drunk to move. Or maybe she just doesn't want to see the world right now. Hard to blame her. This is the part of the gin craze that hits differently. The glamour's gone. The laughter is gone. No pink teacups or powdered faces here. Just a raw kind of grief carved into the corners of alleyways, soaked into every step of the cobbled streets. And the worst of it? It's not just the men drinking themselves into oblivion. It's the mothers, the ones who've run out of everything else. You spend the day watching closely, and what you see is both ordinary and unbearable. A young girl, barely 16, buys a shot of gin before work and sips it slowly while nursing an infant. Her hands shake. Her dress is threadbare. She speaks to no one. Later, you spot her again behind a laundry house, curled up against a wall with the baby on her chest, both of them asleep, or unconscious. It's hard to tell the difference anymore. Here's your historical fact, and it's a bitter one. In the early 18th century, the rate of infant mortality in London was among the highest in Europe. In the poorer wards, nearly 3 out of every 4 babies died before reaching their second birthday. Disease, hunger, cold, but increasingly one more silent killer crept into the nursery: gin. Some mothers gave it to quiet their children, others drank it while nursing, and some, crushed by grief, despair, or plain exhaustion, simply stopped noticing how much they were giving or taking. It's easy to assume cruelty or neglect, but as you talk to people, real people, you realize something else. These women aren't monsters, they're not evil, they're desperate. They work 12-hour days scrubbing floors, making lace, folding laundry, or just standing on street corners hoping someone with coins and soft hands will offer them a way out, even if only for a night. Gin becomes a sedative, a pause button, a breath of silence in a life with none. You meet one woman, Meg, who cradles her child while sipping from a cup that smells like vinegar and turpentine. She doesn't flinch when you ask her why she drinks. "It's either this," she says softly, "or scream into the wind until my throat gives out." The baby shifts in her arms. She strokes its head and adds, "Sometimes it helps her sleep. Sometimes it helps me forget." And then there are the sellers who cater specifically to this market. You find one, a lanky man with watery eyes, who proudly markets his blend as nursery safe. His regulars include women with multiple children, all bone-thin and silent, their eyes ringed with exhaustion. He gives discounts to mothers and extra shots to the weepy ones. You ask if he ever feels guilty. He spits into the gutter and says, "I don't make the world. I just help it sting less." Fringe fact for your dreams tonight. Some Georgian pamphlets included recipes for calming infants using gin. One suggested soaking a cloth in spirits and tying it gently around the baby's head like a bonnet, supposedly to help with teething. Another involved adding a drop of gin to cow's milk to prevent colic, which is generous phrasing for poisoning a toddler. Of course, these weren't medical texts. They were sold alongside astrology charts and cures for baldness. But they sold. People wanted anything that sounded like a solution. And here's where the debate gets heavy. Scholars today still argue about whether gin truly caused a surge in infant mortality, or whether it simply overlapped with an already catastrophic public health crisis. After all, London's slums were overflowing. The water was foul. Diseases like smallpox and cholera spread faster than gossip. Some historians say gin was just another symptom, not the disease itself. Others believe it was the accelerant, the spark in a powder keg of poverty, grief and exhaustion. Either way, it left its mark. You spend time in a charity ward run by a local parish. It smells like bleach and bodies. The women here are ghosts, pale and sunken, some missing teeth, others missing memories. One tells you she gave her son gin to keep him quiet while she worked in a laundry, then came home to find him still. Not sleeping, just still. She hasn't spoken since. She just rocks in a chair all day, holding a doll made of rags and thread. No one corrects her. Outside, the city goes on, men shout, horses clatter past, the gin carts rattle, the cries of vendors, the clinks of cups, the laughter. It all carries on because the machine doesn't stop for sorrow. You step into a courtyard where two women share a bottle between them. One breastfeeds, the other holds the bottle steady. They both look like they haven't slept in days. They smile when they see you. One offers you a sip. You take it. It burns. That night you lie awake in a loft above a fishmonger's shop, the floor damp and the ceiling low. The sound of the river drifts through a cracked window. Somewhere nearby a baby cries, then stops. You don't know whether to feel relief or dread. You press your eyes shut and try to sleep. But the silence that follows is heavier than the crying. You wake up to the smell of smoke, bread, and manure. Standard issue for a Georgian city morning. Your clothes still carry yesterday's weight, a film of fishmonger stink from the loft you slept in, and a faint trace of gin that clings to your sleeves like guilt. You stretch your legs, rub your eyes, and realise something strange. You haven't had a drink yet, and your hands are shaking. You tell yourself it's just the cold, but it's not just the cold. As you move through the marketplace, weaving between stalls selling limp vegetables and questionable pies, your ears catch a familiar argument. "Beer's better," someone shouts. "Gin's a devil's draught." A woman yells back, "Only devil I know's my landlord." There's laughter, groaning, and a toast from someone who's clearly decided both drinks can live in harmony, as long as they're free. You stop at a public house, more stable than the gin dens, with low timber beams and the kind of sticky floor that promises years of spilled secrets. There's a long bench by the hearth and a mix of drinkers, sailors, bricklayers, midwives, and one man who claims to be a barber but hasn't held scissors in a decade. The server, a thick-armed woman with the disposition of a blunt axe, offers you a choice, ale or gin. You pick ale. It's lukewarm, a little sour and frothy in a way that says the barrel's seen better days. But it goes down easier than gin, and for a moment you feel stable, solid, like you're drinking something that's supposed to sustain you rather than break you. Around you, others do the same. You realise something interesting. Ale is where the day starts. Gin is where the day ends. There's an old man nearby with knotted fingers and a face like cracked leather, who tells you he used to be a brewer's apprentice. "Before all this madness," he says, swirling his pint. "Back when men drank proper drink. Brown beer, bread in a bottle. Now they want to burn their souls out with that." He jerks his head toward the alley where the gin carts linger. No patience, no pride, just poison you nod. But you've seen that same man drinking gin after nightfall. This is where the real battle lies. Not just in the bottles, but in the morality people pour into them. Beer is honest, they say. Beer is English. Gin, that's foreign, Dutch, French even, if you ask the particularly paranoid. Gin corrupts. Beer comforts. Gin is for sinners. Beer is for workers. It's not just about taste. It's about what people want to believe. Historical fact time. In 1689, Parliament passed laws encouraging distillation of spirits at home, mainly to undermine the French brandy trade and support English grain farmers. Gin production boomed. But beer, once considered a staple food, began to lose ground. As gin flooded the market, stronger, cheaper, more instantly effective, public health plummeted. By 1740, beer was heavily taxed, while gin was practically handed out in teacups. Of course, this didn't sit well with the ale lobby. Yes, they had one. Brewers, publicans, and beer-loving reformers rallied to reclaim the moral high ground. Pamphlets were published with titles like Beer, Bread and Brotherhood, and Ale for the Honest Man. You even hear a preacher in the square recite one, "Blessed is the man who drinketh beer, for his steps shall be steady, and his wages unspoiled." Someone in the crowd coughs. Unless he drinks 14 of them, but the sermon rolls on. The fringe twist? Some beer houses try to rebrand themselves entirely, calling their establishments gin-free zones or temperance taverns. Of course, most of them kept a bottle or two behind the bar just in case. Money talks louder than morals when rent's due. You wander into a brewery later that day, hoping to dodge the rain. The smell is thick. Yeast, grain, sweat. You watch workers stir massive vats of bubbling brownish liquid, and despite the noise and the heat, there's a sense of pride here. This isn't like the slapdash, barrel-in-a-bucket gin shops. Brewing takes time, precision. One man explains the process to you in great detail, proud as a father reciting his child's school awards. He wipes his hands on his apron and says, "This stuff feeds a man. That other muck just steals him." You nod. But you've seen men just as broken at the bottom of an ale jug as at the bottom of a gin cup. The scholarly debate simmers on. Was gin truly more dangerous than beer, or was it just more visible? Some argue that the higher alcohol content made gin uniquely destructive. Others claim that beer's slow-burn comfort hid just as many ruined lives, just without the screaming babies and collapsing mothers. It's not a clean line. After all, poison is poison, fast or slow. As evening falls, you find yourself back in the same square where the preacher shouted about beer's virtues. The crowd has shifted. The beer drinkers are gone. The gin carts are out. The cups are smaller now, but the spirits are stronger. A boy plays a tin whistle while two women argue over a shared cup. A man sits against the wall, staring into the distance with a half-smile and fully vacant eyes. You sip from a bottle past your way. You don't even ask what it is. By now, you can tell by the heat in your throat and the way your vision flickers at the edges. Beer gives you weight. Gin gives you wings. Wings that tend to catch fire on the way up. Someone across the square starts singing an old drinking song about barley and harvest, but halfway through, the lyrics change. Drink, 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 and forget. It ends. No one corrects him. Everyone just nods. You close your eyes. Beer was supposed to feed the people. Gin made them forget they were starving. Night has fallen again, but this time the darkness feels different. Heavier. It's the kind of night where the fog curls low around your ankles like it's trying to pull you under. The city's usual background noise, shouting vendors, rolling carts, the clatter of hooves, has faded into something more sinister. You hear footsteps that don't match their owners, voices a little too loud for the size of the crowd, and laughter, sharp, sudden, not joyful at all. This isn't just another drunk night in Georgian London. This is gin's other gift, crime. You see it first in the way people move, darting, half-turned, arms held a little too close to their bodies. There's a girl no older than 12 sidling up to men outside the gin carts, not offering flirtation, offering distraction. While her hands wave theatrically, someone else is relieving the target of his pocket watch. You don't even see the partner until they're gone, swallowed by the alley behind the pie stand. Smooth, practiced, and entirely normal. That's the thing about gin-soaked cities. They don't just rot livers, they rot boundaries. The more people drink, the looser their grip on the rules. What's yours becomes mine if you're too drunk to hold on to it. That purse, that loaf of bread, that bottle, finders keepers. Thieves thrive in these conditions, not because they're evil, but because opportunity is staggering around with its shoelaces untied and a glazed look in its eye. You take a seat on a stoop beside a man sharpening a knife. Not threateningly, just casually, like one might whittle a stick out of boredom. You ask him if crime's gotten worse lately. He snorts. Worse, he says. It's just busier. More supply. Gin makes everyone stupid. Makes them easy to lift from. He nods toward a nearby tavern where a man is loudly proclaiming he's just been paid and plans to spend every farthing before dawn. That one won't make it 2 alleys before he's on his knees looking for his boots. A little historical grit for you. During the height of the gin craze, petty theft surged. So did violent robbery. The link wasn't always direct. Gin didn't make people criminals, but it made people vulnerable. Slurred speech, stumbling walks, lapses in memory. You're not just drunk, you're a walking target. And sometimes, you're the one doing the targeting. You trail a group of boys no older than 15, moving like a pack of hungry dogs. They're not armed, nothing visible anyway, but they've got the look. Eyes sharp, feet quick. They slip into the back of a gin shop, spend a few minutes, then pour out laughing. One of them holds up a bottle and yells, "Didn't even pay," before vanishing into the dark. You follow, curious. 2 streets over, they're splitting coins and joking about who distracted the barkeep better. One pulls out a knife, not to threaten, just to open a crusty heel of bread. It's all very casual, like discussing the weather, but not all crime is so tidy. You witness a fight break out outside a gin den near Shoreditch. 2 men, both well past the point of making good decisions, are arguing over who bought the last round. It starts with shouting, then shoving. Then one of them smashes a cup against the other's face, and blood sprays across the cobblestones like spilled paint. The crowd doesn't scatter, they cheer, someplace bets. A constable shows up 5 minutes later, looks bored, and drags them off by their collars. You hear one man promise to bribe his way out before the night is over, and he's probably right. Here's your fringe detail. Bribery during this era isn't just common, it's practically policy. Constables are poorly paid and even more poorly trained. A few coins will often make a charge vanish. Want to avoid court? Slip the right man a half sovereign? Want your gin shop to keep running despite new restrictions? Know who to buy off. The city pretends it wants order. What it actually wants is quiet. The scholars' debate tonight is an old one. Did gin cause the crime wave, or did crime simply rise with the growing population and poverty? Some argue that blaming gin was just an excuse, a way for the upper classes to ignore the real issues: overcrowding, unemployment, hunger, desperation. Others insist that gin did play a central role, not because it made people evil, but because it lowered the bar for bad decisions. When half the city is stumbling, someone's going to fall on a knife. You walk past a church with shattered windows. Inside, someone's squatting in the nave, whispering drunken prayers to a god that may or may not be listening. A woman outside tries to sell you a bottle she claims was blessed by a bishop and will keep your sins soft. You pass, barely. But not before she offers a wink and lifts her skirt to reveal a second bottle tied to her thigh. You see a pickpocket get caught, dragged into an alley by 2 furious men. There's shouting, the sound of a punch, and silence. When you pass the alley later, it's empty except for a hat, a trickle of blood and a boot with no foot inside it. Even children aren't immune. You overhear a boy bragging that he stole 2 loaves and a flask from a blind man. "He didn't see me coming," he cackles. The laughter from his friends is hollow. One of them stares at the ground, maybe thinking about the time he went hungry, maybe just drunk enough to feel bad for a second. It's midnight now. The city has gone soft and strange. You walk past doors bolted shut, windows covered in boards. Dogs roam in packs, gnawing on whatever they can find. Somewhere in the distance, someone sings a lullaby off-key. And the gin, still flowing, still fueling everything. Theft, fights, strange bedfellows, broken promises. You duck into a doorway as a group of men stumbles past, laughing too hard, one of them holding what's clearly someone else's coat. No one stops them. No one even notices. Because in the Georgian Gin Craze, everything's up for grabs, including your sense of right and wrong. Morning in London doesn't arrive gently. There's no golden sunrise or birdsong to ease you awake. Instead, you get a cart full of squealing pigs trundling past your window, a chimney sweep shouting up at the rooftops, and someone hurling a bucket of something awful out their second-story window. It hits the cobblestones with a splat that smells like old stew and worse decisions. You take it as your cue to get up. Today feels different. There's a sense of order in the air. People are dressing a little neater, moving a little faster, and then you see it. A stack of pamphlets fluttering in the breeze like paper crows. One lands at your feet. You pick it up and read the title, printed in bold, pious lettering. A most faithful warning against the destroyer of souls, gin. Oh, here we go. You're about to meet the other side of the craze, the reformers, the moral crusaders, the powdered-wig preachers with ink-stained hands and deep sighs. These are the people who've made it their mission to save your gin-soaked soul whether you like it or not. And they've got woodcuts. You follow the paper trail to its source, a street corner where a tall man in a clerical collar is standing on a crate, waving a pamphlet in one hand and a Bible in the other. His voice is the kind that could peel paint off the church walls. He's got a good rhythm, mothers feeding babies' spirits, men losing their minds to madness, a nation brought low by a single wicked drink. He points to the pamphlet like it's a holy artifact. People gather not because they agree, but because it's loud and free and they have nowhere better to be. He passes out the papers with a kind of frantic energy. You take one and scan it. There's an illustration on the front, a skeletal woman cradling a bottle, her child crying in the dirt. The caption reads, "Mother's Ruin." Inside are verses, moral arguments, statistics, some accurate, many suspicious, and repeated reminders that gin is not just a drink, it's a gateway to hell. You look up from the paper and make eye contact with a woman sipping from a flask behind a stall selling turnips. She raises her drink in salute. You nod back. Your historical fact for today's sermon. By the early 1730s, anti-gin reformers were in full swing. Public moralists, clergymen, social critics, and proto-social workers began publishing endless pamphlets and tracts warning of gin's dangers. They handed them out in churches, on corners, even at the very gin dens they condemned. These pamphlets were dramatic, often illustrated with lurid woodcuts, eyes bulging, babies crying, skeletons grinning beside liquor bottles. Think of them as the 18th century equivalent of clickbait headlines and Facebook panic posts. You find another group huddled inside a church hall nearby. They're printing leaflets by hand, a slow and sweaty process involving ink rollers, clamped wood blocks, and a lot of muttered prayers. The woman overseeing the operation has ink on her nose and a holy fire in her eyes. "If we can save just one soul," she says, pressing a sheet with a flourish, "it's worth the effort." You ask if she's ever tasted gin. She recoils as if you've suggested bathing in sin. "Certainly not," she huffs. "I've no wish to become a beast." But not all reformers are so squeaky clean. Some of them, they're opportunists. You meet a man who prints both anti-gin tracts and gin shop menus. "Business is business," he shrugs. "The moral ones buy the warnings. The thirsty ones buy the labels. I get paid either way." He's currently setting type for a new broadside titled "Gin and the Devil's Work, a Confession." He doesn't bother reading the contents. Your fringe fact: some of the most popular anti-gin pamphlets were written as fictional confessions from gin addicts. One featured a mother who sold her infant for gin, only to be haunted by its ghost. Another was from a barber who murdered a customer mid-shave in a fit of gin-fueled rage. These stories were complete fabrications, of course, but they were reprinted, quoted from pulpits, and believed by more than a few trembling readers. As you move through the city, you start seeing the signs of their influence. Walls painted with slogans like "Drink ale, live long," or "Gin is sin." You see wooden boards nailed to gin shop doors reading "Closed by moral order," though most of those shops have just moved to the alley behind the next street. Some reformers even carry bells, ringing them outside drinking dens to shame the fallen. One such bell ringer gets pelted with a loaf of stale bread and retreats, dignity slightly dented. There's a scholarly question that lingers in your head as you walk. Did these reformers actually help? Some argue their pamphlets and lobbying laid the groundwork for legislative reform. Others say they were too obsessed with morality and not nearly concerned enough with poverty. After all, telling someone not to drink is easy. Giving them a reason not to? That's much harder. Especially when the only thing colder than the gin in your hand is the world outside your door. You step into a coffee house, a real one this time. Brightly lit, thick with smoke, and filled with chatter that ranges from politics to poetry. It's dry, meaning no alcohol is served, and it's full of the reform-minded types who'd like to see gin burned from the earth. A man in a brown wig approaches you, pamphlet in hand, and gives you the kind of smile you'd expect from someone trying to save your soul, and sell you insurance at the same time. "Brother," he says, "have you heard the good word about temperance?" You consider your answer carefully. He launches into a long speech about self-restraint, clean living, and the virtue of being able to feel your toes in the morning. You sip your coffee, it's bitter and too hot, and nod along. He means well. They all do. But you can't help but feel that none of these people have spent a night sleeping on the stone floor of a meat cellar, with nothing but gin to keep the shivers away. As the sun sets, the pamphlets keep fluttering, carried by wind and trodden underfoot. One sticks to your boot. You peel it off and read the last line. Abandon gin and no peace. You fold it, tuck it in your pocket and continue walking. You don't believe in peace. Not tonight. Not while the bells are still ringing and the bottles are still full. By now you know the streets well enough to avoid the worst puddles. You recognise the vendors by name, or at least by scent, and you've learned that if someone offers you a drink on the house, it's either going to kill you or rob you blind. Maybe both. But even with all that experience, today you feel a shift in the air, something tighter in the chest. The usual chaos is still there, the shouting, the stink, the boots in the mud, but it's undercut by a nervous sort of stillness. People are glancing over their shoulders more than usual. Conversations are quieter, and every so often someone mutters the word act, as if saying it too loud might summon the hangman himself. The gin acts. That's what everyone's whispering about. You see the first sign nailed to a wooden post near Covent Garden, splintered and flapping slightly in the wind. It reads, "By order of Parliament, no person shall sell gin without licence. Offenders shall be fined £50 or imprisoned." Below it, someone scrawled in charcoal, "Good luck finding us." You ask a vendor what he thinks of it. He laughs, long and loud, then spits into a gutter. "They've been trying to stop us for years," he says. "Never works. We just change the name, or sell medicine instead." He points to the hand-painted sign above his cart. "Elixir of juniper. Cures all ails." You squint. That's just gin. He grins. "Don't tell Parliament." Here's the historical heart of it. The first Gin Act passed in 1729, an attempt to rein in the explosion of cheap, unlicensed spirits flooding London. It introduced a small tax and required a licence to sell gin, which was met with spectacular indifference by the public. Very few licences were issued. Vendors kept selling. Enforcement was relaxed, to put it generously. So Parliament tried again. In 1736 they passed a much harsher law, raising taxes, tightening controls and promising serious punishment for violators. And the people? They rioted. Well, not full-scale revolution, but definitely a large-scale, gin-fueled shrug. Sellers mocked the law by hanging signs that read, "No gin sold here," while pouring cups from behind a curtain. Others labelled their product as Parliament water or ladies' tonic to avoid legal trouble. Enforcement officers were threatened, bribed, or simply ignored. In one infamous case, a constable was chased down the street with a jug of boiling gin thrown at him. Public sympathy was firmly with the vendors. You wander into a gin shop that's obviously in violation of the Act, but no one's bothering to hide it. The shelves are lined with bottles, some real, most fake. Labels like Sovereign Solution, Herbal Nightcap, and your favourite, Nanny's Nap Juice. You ask the shopkeeper if he's worried about the law. He chuckles and says, "Only if they actually start arresting people," which they won't. "Half the magistrates drink more than I sell," and he's not wrong. Here's your fringe detail. There were cases of local magistrates themselves issuing gin licences to their own shops, or to friends and family, then finding competitors for operating illegally. It was a racket within a racket, all wrapped in a thin sheet of legal paper and a very thick cloud of hypocrisy. But by the 1740s things were starting to change. The pressure from reformers, moralists and concerned citizens, the sober ones at least, grew too loud to ignore. Gin was being blamed for everything: crime, poverty, disease, the downfall of the English character. Parliament tightened the laws again in 1743 and 1747, each time with more teeth, more taxes, more rules. But the game stayed the same. Sellers adapted, buyers shrugged. The city kept drinking. You see one woman arrested near Whitechapel, dragged by two constables who look more embarrassed than authoritative. She's maybe 50, barefoot, hair tangled in a rough braid, and holding a cracked cup that still smells of juniper. She screams, not out of fear but fury. "You drink it too," she shouts. "You all drink it." What, I'm the problem because I'm poor? No one answers. No one meets her eyes. She's carted off, and 10 minutes later someone else sets up shop in her spot. That's the part Parliament never understood. Gin wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. You could fine people all day, but you couldn't legislate hunger, grief or cold out of existence. You couldn't fine away trauma. So the city played a clever game of pretend. Laws passed, protests flared, and meanwhile cups kept clinking in every alley and stairwell. The scholarly debate, naturally, is about effectiveness. Some argue the Gin Acts helped curb consumption eventually, especially by the 1751 Act, which was cleverly designed to target retailers rather than drinkers and included public information campaigns alongside stricter regulations. Others say the laws failed entirely at first, doing little but criminalise the poor while letting wealthier consumers keep sipping in comfort. It's a familiar story. A legal hammer falls, and the most fragile glass shatters first. As you walk, you notice more signs of quiet rebellion. Bottles hidden in baskets under loaves of bread. Street singers hawking healing songs that come with a whispered sip. A woman in a bonnet calls out, "Fresh herbs for the weary soul," and taps the side of her cart twice. A man steps forward, nods, and walks away with a flask tucked into his sleeve. You even come across a full-blown underground gin club, literally underground. A trapdoor hidden behind a butcher's stall leads you down a set of creaking stairs into a candlelit basement, where people sip in near silence. No singing, no shouting, just the clink of glass and the occasional sigh. It feels less like a pub and more like a chapel, a secret church for those who've chosen gin over guilt. You stay for a while, nursing a drink that burns less than usual. Someone plays a slow tune on a violin missing a string. You're surrounded by men and women who know the law is against them, but are too far gone to care, or maybe just tired of caring. Either way, no one here is talking about reform, that they're too busy surviving it. You step outside just in time to see someone hanging from a wall. Not literally, it's a print. A woodcut nailed crookedly to a brick facade, wrinkled and weather-stained but unmistakable. You've seen this image before. Everyone has. The woman in the centre, eyes vacant, mouth slack, bottle in hand, her child tumbling from her arms into a dark stairwell. Around her, chaos blooms like a sick flower. Bodies collapsed, buildings crumbling, people gnawing on bones and fighting in the street. In the top corner, a baby suckles at a bottle labelled gin, while a man lies dead beside a dog chewing his leg. Welcome to Gin Lane. It's one of the most famous and most horrifying images of the gin craze, etched into the public consciousness by a man who'd had quite enough of your tipsy nonsense. William Hogarth, artist, satirist, moralist, and unofficial PR director for 18th century anxiety. You stand there, staring at it, trying to take it all in. It's overwhelming, chaotic, exaggerated, but not untrue. You've seen versions of each of these scenes just this week. The skeletal mother, that was Meg. The starving baby, that was the girl by the market. The brawling drunkards, take your pick. Hogarth didn't invent the horrors, he just arranged them for maximum impact. And here's the twist. Gin Lane wasn't born in a vacuum. It was part of a carefully orchestrated campaign. In 1751, Parliament introduced the final and most effective of the Gin Acts, designed not just with legal teeth but with public persuasion. Alongside the legislation came pamphlets, speeches, songs, and, most powerfully, Hogarth's prints. Because if Parliament couldn't shame people into sobriety, they were going to scare them straight. Right next to Gin Lane, another image is posted. Beer Street. It's everything Gin Lane isn't. Clean, tidy, joyful. People are working, smiling, building, even wooing. Ale is everywhere, but it's gentle, golden, and apparently incapable of destroying lives. In one corner, a plump man happily drinks while painting a sign that reads, "Health and Industry." It's propaganda, pure and simple. A beer ad disguised as social commentary, a little historical flavour. Hogarth's prints were released as engravings, widely distributed, cheap enough for the middle class to afford. They weren't just art, they were marketing. Alongside them came sermons, laws, and posters from reformers eager to piggyback on Hogarth's moral outrage. The result? Gin Lane became the defining image of the era, so effective that people still picture it today when they think of the gin craze. But here's where it gets interesting. You start talking to people about the prints, asking what they think, and the responses aren't what you expect. A grocer shrugs and says, "Looks bad, sure, but I've never seen someone drop a baby like that." A woman in a shawl snorts and mutters, "They want us to feel shame, but they never feed us." One man spits on the ground and says, "Beer don't taste half as good, even with their pretty pictures." Because for every Gin Lane there's a dozen undrawn alleys where people drank just to get by. not to fall apart. Hogarth, in all his cleverness, drew with a heavy brush. His prints scream despair, but they leave out the nuance, the complexity, the millions of quiet sips that didn't end in madness or murder. And here's your fringe detail. Some critics at the time accused Hogarth of hypocrisy. He was known to enjoy his drink, after all, and he made plenty of money off vice before deciding to scold it. One particularly scathing pamphlet called Gin Lane, a work of art drawn by a man who found his own soul at the bottom of a bottle and chose to blame the bottle. The scholarly debate circles this same point. Was Hogarth helping or hurting? Was Gin Lane an honest reflection of societal decay, or a fear-mongering cartoon meant to manipulate the middle class into moral panic? Some argue it was both, a necessary shock to the system that also punched down on the already downtrodden. Either way, it worked. Public sentiment began to shift, not immediately, but noticeably. You watch as a preacher uses the print as a sermon prop, holding it aloft like a holy relic. "This," he cries, jabbing the air, "this is what the bottle brings. This is the devil's mural." He doesn't notice the two drunk men peeing on the wall behind him. One of them leans over and whispers, "Oi, is that me mum?" Even so, you can't deny the power of the image. Everywhere you go that day you see more copies, on tavern doors, nailed to church fences, smeared onto newspapers. It's like London can't stop staring at its own reflection, hoping to see something better, or at least feel something different. But by evening you end up back where you started, some grimy corner with a cracked bottle and the scent of regret. You think about Beer Street, the fantasy of it, the clean lines, the tidy smiles, the idea that a better drink could make for a better life. Maybe it could, maybe not. You pull a wrinkled copy of Gin Lane from your coat pocket and smooth it out on your lap. It's worse in person. The desperation, the detail, the woman's empty eyes. You stare for a long time, trying to decide whether it's art or accusation. Maybe both. You look up. Across the street, a boy no older than 10 swigs from a bottle, winces and wipes his mouth with a grin. Behind him, someone lights a pipe. Someone else argues about wages, and the city hums its usual tune of survival. You fold the image up and tuck it away, because no matter how loudly it screams, Gin Lane is just paper. London? London is still drinking. It's Sunday morning, which in theory means peace, quiet, and reflection. But Georgian London doesn't do anything quietly, not even religion. The church bells ring out like they're trying to rattle the gin out of your bones, and already you can hear the scratch of stiff shoes on cobblestones, the rustle of taffeta, and the low murmur of hymns being mumbled through hangovers. You follow the sound, more out of curiosity than conviction, toward one of the grander churches in the district. Stone walls, iron gates, and a wooden sign posted outside reading, "Today's sermon, the devil in a bottle." That's subtle. Inside, the pews are filling with people who look like they've seen better decades. Their faces are drawn, their clothes patched, their posture slumped just slightly, but they're here. The room is cold, the air full of dust and candle wax, and at the front, standing beneath a pulpit that's been carved with angels who are definitely judging you, is the man himself, Reverend Godfrey Pine, scourge of gin, saviour of souls, and owner of the most intimidating eyebrows you've ever seen. He starts soft, talks about community, about hardship, about temptation. Then, as if he's been waiting for it, he shifts into a rhythm, a cadence that sounds less like a sermon and more like a battle cry. "Sisters and brothers," he calls out, "do you not see what the devil has poured into our cups? Do you not feel his clawed fingers in your trembling hands? Look to your children. Look to your homes. Gin is the devil's baptism." You glance around, some nod, some look down. One man in the third row lets out a quiet hiccup that smells like juniper and shame. No one says anything, but the woman beside him subtly scoots her bonnet away. Your historical anchor here. By the mid-17th century, gin had become a regular feature in sermons across England, especially in the more urban, working-class districts. Preachers like Reverend Pine weren't just reacting to the drink itself, but to what it symbolised. Poverty, lawlessness, moral decay. To them, gin wasn't just a beverage. It was a battlefield, a spiritual invasion. And it wasn't just in the churches. Pamphlets, as you've seen, were printed by religious societies. Schools hosted lectures. Missionaries roamed the streets like door-to-door exorcists. Some churches even opened up their own gin-free taverns, offering ale, tea, and prayers instead of poison. Spoiler, they didn't draw crowds. One particularly bold preacher in Spitalfields opened his sermon by pouring gin onto the pulpit and setting it on fire. The smell reportedly made 3 people vomit and another faint. He considered it a great success. But let's not pretend the church was entirely unified on the matter. This brings us to today's scholarly itch. Not all clergy condemned gin. Some thought the backlash was overblown, more about social control than actual morality. After all, beer was embraced, wine was practically a sacrament, and the upper classes were still sipping their refined spirits with 0 consequences. The moral panic, some argued, was targeted, aimed not at the drink but at the drinker. Poor, urban, ungovernable. You feel this tension even now as Reverend Pine turns his gaze toward the back pews, where the most ragged sit, women with swollen ankles, boys with soot-streaked faces, a man gently snoring under his hat. "Look at what gin has made of you," he says, voice dropping low. Once proud citizens of this kingdom, now little more than ghosts wandering from cup to cup. Someone near you whispers, "That ghost still pays taxes." You don't turn to see who said it. After the service, people file out slowly, some staying behind to pray, others to beg, still others just to get warm. Outside the gate, a man is selling fresh rolls and cleansing tea. You're about to buy one when a woman passes by muttering, "The preacher drinks wine with dinner, says it's for digestion." You don't buy the tea. Instead, you wander over to a smaller chapel tucked between 2 shops, where the atmosphere is softer, less theatrical. Inside, a young curate is talking gently to a group of mothers. He's not shouting, he's not condemning, just listening. You watch as one woman cries into her hands, clutching a small wooden cross. Another hands him a paper, probably a name for prayer. The curate nods. "We all have something to survive," he says. "Some just do it badly." Outside, the gin sellers are already reappearing, subtler on Sundays but not absent. A man in a fine coat steps out from the chapel and walks straight to a cart labelled Sunday Soothe. He downs a shot, wipes his mouth and tips the vendor. The vendor bows like he's just served royalty. "Your fringe detail today?" Some churches, especially in poorer districts, secretly allowed vendors to sell gin on their steps during the week. The money helped keep the doors open. A few even operated their own distilleries under the guise of herbal medicine. One such operation was raided and found to be producing 200 bottles a day. The vicar claimed it was for the healing of the congregation. By evening the sermons fade, the bells stop ringing and the city slouches back into its nightly rhythm. The streetlights flicker to life. A boy sings a hymn off-key while holding out a cup for coins, and behind him, 2 drunk men argue about whether gin was in the Bible. You duck into a side alley, light fading fast. Somewhere behind you, Reverend Pine's words echo in your head. The devil's baptism. You don't feel baptized. You feel damp, tired, and slightly more aware of your spine than you'd like. But when someone offers you a bottle with a half smile and a twinkle of kindness, you take it. Because sometimes when the sermon ends, the city just keeps talking. You wake to the creak of a shutter, the soft clink of metal on glass, and the unmistakable scent of lavender oil cut with gin. It's a curious perfume, the kind that says, "I've been up all night, but I'm still pretending it was worth it." Your surroundings are different today. Quieter. Tidier. You're in a boarding house in Bloomsbury, and from the floral patterns on the curtains and the number of hairpins scattered across the dresser, you can tell this place belongs to a woman, a refined one, or at least someone aiming to appear that way. She walks in wearing a robe that's a few seasons out of date, but still clings to some sense of elegance. Her eyes are sharp, though, no hint of the soft, stumbling drunkards you usually pass in the streets. She raises an eyebrow at you and says, "Don't get any ideas. You passed out during cards, not romance." Then she pours herself a drink. So, welcome to the private world of the Georgian woman drinker. Out there in the streets, gin is usually painted as the ruin of mothers, the downfall of wives, the mark of a woman gone feral. The imagery you've seen, especially in Hogarth's work, shows women slumped in alleys, children neglected, faces gaunt and wild. But that's not the whole picture, not even close. Inside the parlours and powder rooms of London, women have their own quiet relationships with the bottle. Hidden flasks and sewing baskets. Tonic bottles with corks worn from frequent use. Perfume with a kick. Behind lace curtains, the gin flows just as freely. It's just dressed up in propriety. Your hostess, who calls herself Miss Thatcher, though you suspect that's not the name on her birth record, gives you a little tour, not of the house, of her collection. Bottles shaped like cats, small decanters carved from shell, one disguised as a snuff box. All gifts, she says, sipping slowly, from men who think I only drink when they're here. There's a historical nugget for your collection. While the public often demonized women for drinking, the private truth was that many did, and quite regularly. For poor women, gin was an escape from endless labour and sorrow. For middle-class women, it was a quiet rebellion against domestic life and dull husbands. And for women like Miss Thatcher, independent, unmarried, unconventional, it was a way to maintain composure in a world that insisted she have none. She offers you a glass of something she calls laudanum light, which is a terrifying name for what turns out to be a gin blend infused with herbs and a whisper of opium. Just enough to take the edge off, she says. You sip it cautiously and feel your teeth tingle. Later you join her and two other women for what they call a circle of honesty. It's not spiritual. It's not serious. It's three women in a rented room, drinking and talking about all the things they can't say in the daylight. One confesses she hides gin in the water jug beside her bed. Another says she pours a little into the soup every Sunday, to make my husband tolerable. Miss Thatcher tells a story about drinking with a duchess who kept her gin hidden in a hollowed-out Bible. Here's your fringe fact. There were actually commercially sold prayer books with compartments carved into them to hold flasks. The Lady's Companion, they were sometimes called. Elegant, discreet, and deeply ironic. A woman could carry her salvation and her sin in the same hand. Of course, not every story is playful. One of the women, quiet, pale, barely touched her glass, talks about losing her child last winter. Not to gin, she says, to the cold. But she hasn't had a full night's sleep since, and when the shaking starts, she drinks just enough to quiet it. It's not the gin I fear, she murmurs. It's what I remember without it. You don't say much. You're just there to listen. And maybe that's the lesson today. For women, drinking isn't just defiance or desperation. It's memory management, survival through sedation. Because in a city where your options are marriage, poverty, or spinsterhood, sometimes gin is the only thing that lets you control anything at all. There's a scholarly argument that's long haunted this part of the story. Some historians claim the panic around female gin consumption was less about the drink and more about power. Drunken women scared the establishment, not because they were falling apart, but because they stopped conforming. They weren't obedient wives or doting mothers. They were loud, they were sexual, they were unpredictable, and gin conveniently gave society a scapegoat. Blame the bottle, not the system that drove them to it. The evening winds down. Miss Thatcher lights a candle and changes into a nightdress with practised grace. She pours one last drink, not for you, not even for herself, but for the woman who stayed quiet most of the night. For the ghosts, she says, lifting the glass. The others nod. No one clinks, no one drinks. They just sit there, letting the silence settle in. Outside, the streets are still awake. You hear a couple arguing 2 floors below. The rattle of a cart, a cat yowling in heat. Life goes on, loud and unwieldy. But here in this little rented room, women have carved out a space for themselves. Not safe exactly, but softer. A space where gin isn't ruin, but ritual. You find your way to a corner chair and close your eyes. The scent of lavender lingers, still cut with that sharp bite of juniper. The women whisper a little longer, then one by one the candles go out. And for the first time in a long while, you sleep in a room where no one is crying. By the time you open your eyes, the sun is already high, and your mouth tastes like you've been chewing on a copper coin. The chair you slept in has pressed its pattern into your back, and your neck feels like it's aged 10 years overnight. But you're upright, warm, and indoors. Already a minor miracle in this city. You stretch, blink, and catch sight of your coat, draped over a low dresser beside an empty bottle and a smudge of rouge. Miss Thatcher and the others are gone. No sign, no note, just silence and dust motes dancing in the beam of light spilling through the window. You don't get far before it happens. One moment you're strolling down the street humming something off key and thinking about breakfast, or gin, whichever comes first. The next you're being yanked sideways by a rough pair of hands and slammed into a wall hard enough to make your ribs rattle. A man in a dark coat with the look of someone who enjoys his job far too much holds up a silver badge and says 5 words you've dreaded since the day you stumbled into Gin Lane. you're under arrest for drunkenness. Now let's be honest, he's not wrong. Your face still carries the flush of last night, your gait is off balance, and your breath probably smells like a juniper bush set on fire. But still, this? You weren't causing a scene. You didn't throw a bottle or shout at a horse. You're just publicly not sober, and in Georgian London, that's enough. Welcome to your personal tour of the justice system. You're dragged through the streets, not roughly, but with a casual efficiency that suggests they've done this many times before. People don't stare, they barely glance. This isn't unusual, it's Tuesday. By the time you reach the magistrate's court, your arm is sore, your pride is bruised, and you've acquired a new smell. 1 part sweat, 1 part dried gin, and 1 part old wood polish from the splintered bench you're tossed onto. The courtroom is a farce, a cramped, echoing chamber filled with the worst kind of theatre. The magistrate wears a powdered wig and a look of supreme boredom, as if he's just woken up from a nap and is only half sure which century he's in. The clerk rattles off your name, misspelled of course, and the charge, public inebriation and disorderly conduct. You want to object, but your tongue is slow and your head feels like someone's playing a violin inside your skull, so you sit and wait and try to look sober. Here's your historical fact. By the 1730s and 1740s, gin-related arrests in London had skyrocketed. Public drunkenness was one of the most common charges, especially in poorer districts where enforcement was both easier and more politically convenient. And while men were often arrested for fighting or theft, women were disproportionately targeted for drinking in public, even when their only crime was appearing intoxicated while female. They call your name, you stand, wobble slightly. The magistrate peers at you over his spectacles and asks, "Have you anything to say for yourself?" You consider quoting scripture. You consider fainting. You settle for, "It was a small one." The court chuckles, not kindly. You're fined on the spot, 5 shillings which you don't have. The alternative? A few days in the local lockup. They call it a house of correction, but don't let the name fool you. There's very little correction and even less house. The constable leads you down a narrow corridor that smells like despair and mildew. The cell you're shoved into is barely wide enough to lie down in. Straw lines the floor, but it's damp, and something in the corner is definitely alive. You share the space with 2 other people, a woman who won't stop muttering about rats, and a boy who looks like he's been crying for hours. You try to find a dry patch of wall to lean against and breathe through your mouth. Fringe fact for your holding cell misery. London's prisons during the Gin Craze were overflowing, filthy, and wildly inconsistent. Some were private enterprises, where inmates had to pay for everything. Food, bedding, even water. Couldn't pay. Sleep in the hallway and starve. Others were state-run and not much better. Disease spread fast, corruption faster, and unless you had friends or bribes, you were just another name in a rotting ledger. There's a scholarly question worth considering while you're chewing on a dry patch of air. Was the legal crackdown on gin actually about public health, or just about appearances? Some historians argue that arrests like yours were more about control than concern. Gin was the symptom, not the disease. What the government really wanted was a city that looked orderly even if it wasn't. Haul away the drunkards, slap on a fine, and ignore the fact that the gin sellers were still doing brisk business just outside the courthouse. After what feels like several eternities, someone arrives with a folded note and a small purse. A name is whispered. A fine is paid. The door creaks open. You blink into the light like you've just emerged from the underworld, and in a way you have. Turns out Miss Thatcher sent someone. She claims you owe her a bottle and a rematch at cards. You owe her more than that. You step outside. The air hits you like a second arrest. You stink, you're hungry, you're exhausted. But you're free. Sort of. You wander down the street, past the same stalls, the same faces, the same gin carts that never left. The world didn't pause while you were inside, it never does. You find a bench, sit, breathe. A man walks by and offers you a drink. You hesitate, you really do. But you're cold, and you're angry, and you're tired of being punished for doing what half the city does without consequence. You take it. You can feel it creeping in long before you recognize it for what it is. It starts in your sleep, or what passes for it, when the dreams turn jagged. Your body twitches awake for no reason. Your heart races, your teeth ache, your skin feels too tight. You chalk it up to the gin, or the cold, or the rats, or maybe just the city itself gnawing on your nerves. But it doesn't go away. and soon it starts following you into the day. You notice your hands trembling when you're not holding a bottle. Sounds become too loud. Horses clatter like thunder. Street criers seem to scream. Even the flap of laundry in the wind sounds like snapping bones. You flinch at shadows that aren't moving, and sometimes, for just a second, you see things that aren't there. A face in a window. A whisper behind your ear. It's nothing. It's everything. Congratulations! You've stepped over the threshold into what Georgian doctors cheerfully call gin madness. You hear the term tossed around casually, usually with a sneer. Old Jack went gin mad, poor sod. Her? Gin's eaten what little brain she had. It's part insult, part diagnosis, and all fear. You see it in the way people cross the street when a man begins shouting at invisible enemies. You hear it in the nervous laughter that follows when someone convulses mid-step. The unspoken rule, as long as you're drinking, you're fine. It's when you stop that things get ugly. Here's your historical backbone. 18th century physicians were only beginning to dabble in the complexities of mental illness, and for most, the explanation for gin madness was simple: too much drinking. They blamed it for everything from hysteria to seizures to sudden death. One famous pamphlet claimed that a woman who drank gin for 8 straight days developed the scream of a dying animal and the strength of 6 men. Another described a man who believed himself to be a wooden table and refused to bend his knees. And that's the generous science. The less generous doctors, they bled you, purged you, administered mercury or antimony to balance the humours. One particularly trendy cure involved cold baths and confinement, basically shoving you into a stone-walled room and dumping buckets of freezing water on your head until you either calmed down or stopped breathing. You meet one of these doctors, of course. He introduces himself as Dr. Brooks, though his coat is more rumpled than reassuring, and his breath smells like brandy. I specialise in cases of intemperate lunacy, he says proudly. He shows you around a facility he claims is a humane asylum. It looks like a warehouse with barred windows. The patients inside moan and rock in corners, some muttering prayers, others curled up like cats in sunbeams that never arrive. These poor souls, Brooks says, were once as you are now. He says it kindly, but you hear the warning. There's a woman in the far cell who sings to her own hair. She used to sell herbs in the market. Another man taps out the same pattern on the floor with his fingers, over and over and over. That's the gin rhythm, one orderly jokes. You don't laugh. The fringe fact for this descent into madness? Some quack healers sold anti-gin tonics, herbal brews, vinegar tinctures, even powdered rhubarb, that supposedly cured addiction and madness in one miraculous dose. Most were just water and lies. One notorious cure-all called Sobriety's Kiss was advertised as a moral elixir, though it was later discovered to contain traces of opium and foxglove, 2 substances that might stop the shakes, or your heart depending on the dose. Outside you start seeing the signs everywhere. A woman in the market suddenly screams and drops her basket. No one helps. A boy rolls in the gutter, laughing, then sobbing, then silent. You pass a man preaching to a row of chickens, all lined up and staring at him like obedient parishioners. No one stops him. No one even glances. You ask someone how long it takes to go mad. They shrug. Depends on the gin. There's a scholarly argument here, of course. Some say gin madness was just an umbrella term used to label anything inconvenient or uncomfortable. Withdrawal symptoms, trauma responses, epilepsy, grief. Others believe the damage was real, measurable, neurological. Still others argue that most of these people were never mad, just suffering in public, which society has always found inconvenient. You think about the time you tried to go sober for a day, just one day. The shakes, the nausea, the prickling fear that crawled up your spine like frostbite. You remember how everything felt louder, like the world was turning up the volume just to punish you, and you remember the moment you gave in, not because you wanted the drink, but because you needed the silence it brought. So no, you're not surprised anymore when someone walks into a fountain fully clothed and declares themselves the queen, or when another man eats dirt and calls it bread for the righteous. This city's full of ghosts, half alive, half drunk, and fully ignored. Gin didn't create madness, it just opened the door and left it wide. You return to Miss Thatcher's that evening. You don't know why. Maybe it's the lavender. Maybe it's the way she talks, like your sanity isn't something you have to prove. She lets you in without comment, hands you a cup. Not gin this time, just tea. You sip it slowly, waiting for your hands to stop trembling. She doesn't ask what you've seen. She already knows. Some days, she says, I wonder if the real madness is trying to survive this place without it. You don't disagree. That night you lie in bed and listen to your own heartbeat like it's ticking down to something. Outside, the city growls and sings and drinks itself into another round of forgetfulness. You pull the blanket tighter and try to sleep before your thoughts start whispering. Because you've seen what happens when they get loud. You're walking through a market that doesn't belong to London. Not exactly. The smells are sharper, richer, sugar, spices, smoke. The people move differently, sun-darkened and barefoot, shouting in tongues you don't understand. Palm trees rise in the distance and the heat clings to your neck like a damp scarf. This isn't a dream. It's a memory, or maybe a reckoning. Because if you want to know what's really in your cup, you have to follow it back to where it begins. Welcome to the colonies. You're in the Caribbean now, where the sugar grows tall and sweet and in endless rows. It's beautiful from a distance, swaying like gold-green waves under a hot sky. But up close, it's something else entirely. Men in chains, women with scars, children too small to carry buckets but doing it anyway. The fields hum with sweat and sorrow, and the air tastes like ash. This is where your gin gets its sweetness, though no one ever mentions it back in London. Sweetness, it turns out, comes at a brutal cost. You follow a shipment from a port in Barbados, sugar, molasses and rum barrels stacked high on creaking docks. The workers here are not workers in the way you know them. They are property, bought, sold, beaten. You see one man collapse in the sun, no one stops. A child stares at you with eyes too old for her face. You want to look away, but you don't. You can't, because this is where the story shifts. Here's your historical fact. The gin you've been drinking isn't made with sugar directly, but it is shaped by the sugar trade. By the 18th century, the triangular trade route between Europe, Africa and the Americas was well established. Britain sent manufactured goods to Africa, traded them for enslaved people, who were then shipped to the Caribbean to work on plantations. From there, sugar and molasses were sent back to Britain, fueling both the rum industry and indirectly the gin boom. Because what better to mask the harsh burn of cheap spirits than a splash of syrup or a sugar lump? Even the juniper berries, when not harvested locally, came from Dutch colonies, and the botanicals in fancier gins, cinnamon, cardamom, citrus peels, travelled along the same routes as slaves, ivory and gold. Every sip of your lady's comfort or mother's helper has the taste of empire baked into it. You return to London, standing now outside the Royal Docks, watching the barrels roll in. Merchants laugh, tallying profits. Dockhands haul sacks of raw cane and crates of exotic ingredients. A sailor leans against a crate and tells you how the sugar was cut from the backs of black men, then offers you a lump for your tea. You decline. You walk inland, past the warehouses where molasses is boiled and sold in sticky bottles with gilded labels. The rum flows faster here, but the gin isn't far behind. Distillers buy sugar by the ton, cutting their mixtures with sweeteners to make the burn more bearable. Gin used to be sharp and medicinal, but now it's flavoured, sometimes faintly, sometimes obnoxiously, like a candy meant to trick a child. And it works. More people drink. More people come back for another round. Here's a fringe fact you won't hear in any tavern song. One of the earliest gin cocktails was called bumbo, a crude mix of rum or gin, sugar, nutmeg and water, used to soften the edge of bad booze and sell it to poorer customers who couldn't afford anything better. Some sellers soaked bread crusts in the stuff and sold them to children. It was called gin-soaked toast. It was breakfast. You sit on a stoop across from a sweet shop, watching as a group of children crowd around the window. They point to the candied citrus slices, the sugar drops, the chocolate rounds. Inside, the woman behind the counter is cheerful, powdered and polite. She offers samples to the well-dressed and shoos away the barefoot. What she doesn't say is that all her sugar comes from the West Indies, from men and women who will never taste the things they help create. A preacher walks by, waving a pamphlet about temperance, crying out against the devil's drink. You wonder if he knows what's in his morning tea, if he understands that the sugar he stirs with such righteous fury comes from the same chains as the gin he condemns. The scholarly debate here is fierce and uncomfortable. Some argue that Britain's thirst for spirits directly fueled its expansion of slavery. More sugar meant more plantations, meant more slaves, meant more profits. Others suggest that the gin craze was only indirectly tied to the slave trade, a side effect of economic systems rather than a deliberate exploitation. But if you follow the ships, the barrels, the coins and the corpses, it becomes very hard to separate anything. You attend a meeting of abolitionists in a dim back room lit by whale oil lamps and moral outrage. They talk of boycotting sugar, of refusing rum, of shaming households that sip sweet drinks without question. One woman stands and tells a story about her brother, lost on a ship that ran aground off Jamaica. Another man reads aloud from a letter written by an enslaved woman who watched her children die in the cane fields. The room is silent. Then someone says, "And yet the gin flows." You leave before the tea is served. That night you visit a tavern in the merchant quarter, nicer than your usual haunts, but not fancy enough to hide the truth. A well-dressed man at the bar orders a golden cup, gin, syrup, a splash of lemon stirred with a sugar stick. He toasts the empire and drinks deeply. You sit beside him and ask if he knows where the sugar came from. He shrugs. "I pay for it." That's all I need to know. You finish your drink in silence. Later, alone, you stare at your cup. It's empty. But the residue clings to the sides. Sweet, sticky, impossible to ignore. You think of the fields, the faces, the blood behind the syrup, the sweat beneath the citrus. You think about the idea that a single sip could stretch across oceans, over graves and whips and stolen names. And then you pour another, because knowing the truth doesn't always make it easier to stop drinking. Sometimes it just makes the aftertaste harder to swallow. You don't expect Vienna to care, or Paris, or Berlin. You assume the continent has better things to do than worry about what you're sipping in a London alleyway. But apparently the rest of Europe has been watching, and judging, and wrinkling its powdered nose at Britain's gin-soaked spiral. They're writing letters, printing essays, making toasts about your collective downfall. It turns out the gin craze isn't just a local scandal. It's international entertainment. You hear it first in a coffee house where the gossip runs faster than the ink. A merchant from the Low Countries is loudly quoting from a Dutch newspaper, laughing behind his teacup. The English have replaced bread with spirits, and their children learn to stumble before they learn to speak. He roars with laughter, but no one else finds it quite as funny. One man mutters, "Easy for them to say. They drink schnapps for breakfast." The merchant smirks. "At least we remember the evening." Turns out Europe has opinions, and most of them are not flattering. You pick up a translated pamphlet from a French visitor who spent 2 months in London in 1749. His observations are surgical. "The people are industrious," he writes, "but possessed by a strange melancholy which they drown in a drink so foul it would not be served to pigs in Paris." He calls gin a liquid fog, says it steals the soul and rots the city from within. In the margins someone has scribbled, "says the man who eats frogs." Here's your historical fact. During the height of Britain's gin crisis, foreign observers were indeed writing about it with alarm, scorn, and occasionally delight. French journals mocked the English for their national addiction, while German philosophers speculated that a people so committed to poisoning themselves might not survive the century. It became a kind of grim joke. Britain, mighty and imperial abroad, collapsing at home in a puddle of its own spirits. Of course, it wasn't just ridicule. Some European thinkers were genuinely horrified. Letters from diplomats described the streets of London in apocalyptic terms. Infants drinking gin, mothers slumped over market stalls, soldiers too drunk to stand during guard duty. One Prussian envoy wrote that the British treat gin as both mother and mistress, and warned that no nation could remain civil for long under such a spell. Meanwhile, you hear that British aristocrats abroad are doing their best to pretend none of this is happening. In Rome, they sip Italian wine and claim ignorance. In the salons of Paris, they insist the gin craze is a temporary working-class indulgence, a sort of national hiccup soon to be corrected. One even says it's merely a fashion, like powdered wigs or gout. Someone else murmurs, "I've seen gout. It doesn't steal babies." There's a fringe fact that floats to the surface while you sip a cup of punch in a tavern owned by a Dutch immigrant. The French considered the English gin habit so shocking that it inspired several satirical plays in Paris. One featured a character called Madame Geneviève, a shrieking Englishwoman who drinks herself blind, loses her husband, and eventually marries a bottle. The audience laughed. The critics praised it as a most accurate depiction of British manners. You can't decide whether to laugh or throw something. But there's another layer here, one that feels a little less smug. You start to notice a strange curiosity, even a hint of envy. In a German print shop, you see pamphlets warning that gin is spreading across the Channel, that the English sickness is already infecting taverns in Hamburg and Copenhagen. In Amsterdam, A man tells you he's seen Dutch sailors bring bottles back from London and sell them to their friends as souvenirs. Like plague, he says, but funnier. This is where the scholarly conversation gets messy. Some historians argue that the gin craze exposed the cracks in Britain's social fabric, poverty, urban sprawl, colonial guilt, and that Europe's reaction was equal parts concern and self-congratulation. Others suggest the mockery was performative. After all, every nation had its vice. Absinthe in France, vodka in Russia, brandy in Spain. It was easier to point at Britain's failures than confront your own. You attend a debate at a private club hosted by a visiting Swiss intellectual. The topic? Can a gin-drinking nation govern the world? The speakers are eloquent, theatrical, and slightly drunk. One argues that gin is merely a tool of the working class, no different from opium in China or tobacco in Virginia. Another claims gin is the cause of Britain's imperial aggression, not a symptom. What else would drive a man to conquer half the globe, he says, but a desperate need to forget where he came from? It's not all talk. Some countries begin passing their own laws to prevent the English disease. Import restrictions, local crackdowns, public campaigns. You hear of a Dutch preacher who carries around a small bottle of English gin as a visual aid, holding it up during sermons and shouting, "Behold, the soul of London." In Sweden, a doctor publishes a treatise warning that gin causes nervous fits, loose morals, and noisy childbirths. That last one's never explained. Back in London, the reaction is mixed. Some citizens are embarrassed. They mutter about national pride and foreign slander. Others are defensive. "We may drink too much," one man says, "but we do it in English." You meet a woman in Soho who's collected a stack of anti-English French pamphlets and now uses them to line her firewood bin. "Let them mock," she says, tossing one in. "We'll see who's warm come winter." You walk through the city that evening thinking about how the world sees you. A nation of thinkers, a nation of drunks, a kingdom of progress, a kingdom slumped against its own bar. Maybe all those things are true. Maybe none of them matter when your boots are filled with mud and your blood with gin. You pass a group of children singing a twisted rhyme in the street. The Dutch drink beer, the French drink wine, the English drink their blood and brine. If you should ask the reason why, they're drunk before they learn to cry. They laugh and tumble away. You stare after them, wondering if they made it up themselves or learned it from someone who read it in a letter from Paris. Either way, the world is watching, and the bottle is still full. You've been in London long enough now that nothing should surprise you. But then you turn a corner and find yourself staring at a woman with a gin bottle strapped to her hat. She's not drunk, at least not entirely, and she walks with the poise of someone who knows exactly how ridiculous she looks and doesn't care. Around her neck is a ribbon with a tiny pewter cup dangling from it like a locket. A fashion statement? A survival tool? Both? Turns out, even in an age of moral panic, fashion and vanity still find a way to mingle with vice. Welcome to the world of gin-inspired style, where powdered wigs meet liquor-soaked lace, and gossip is served with a splash of tonic and a raised eyebrow. You follow her through a marketplace pulsing with colour and clamour. Stalls overflow with bonnets, ribbons, trinkets, and perfumes, many of which, oddly enough, smell faintly of juniper. A vendor waves you over and offers a small vial labelled Madame Geneva's Essence. It's not a drink, not officially. It's a perfume, allegedly. But when you take a sniff, it nearly singes your nose hairs. You ask what's in it. He smiles. Mostly gin, with a bit of lavender for respectability. Here's your historical anchor. As the gin craze dug deeper into London's social fabric, it didn't just rot teeth and tear apart families. It also seeped into culture, fashion, and gossip. Satirists drew cartoons of elegantly dressed ladies tipping gin into their teacups. Street vendors sold gin-themed jewellery, tiny bottles on chains, miniature drinking cups made of silver, and even rings with hidden compartments for a quick nip. It was a joke, yes, but one that often disguised real use. You end up in a dressmaker's shop where two women argue over fabric. One wants to hide her flask in her bodice. The other prefers a concealed pocket in her skirt. The seamstress sighs and offers a third option, a corset with a sewn-in flask beneath the ribcage. "Holds about 6 ounces," she says proudly. "You'll need to breathe shallow, but it keeps the hands free." This brings you to today's fringe fact. Some Georgian women wore panniers, those wide hoop structures beneath their dresses, not just for style, but as hiding places. A well-placed bottle could rest comfortably under the skirts, muffled by fabric, and easily accessed with a practiced hand. One scandalous report even claimed a duchess spilled gin on a bishop's shoe when she leaned forward during a prayer and dislodged her hidden stash. The bishop reportedly did not forgive, but the obsession didn't stop at clothing. It was in the salons, the songbooks, the whispered conversations over card tables. You're invited to a gathering in a townhouse near Mayfair, where the guests drink genteel gin from crystal glasses, pinkies raised, while sharing stories of who passed out where and who drank themselves out of an inheritance. The stories are told with glee, like battle tales from a war of indulgence. One woman tells of her cousin, a lady of impeccable breeding, who was caught asleep on a garden bench with a gin bottle tucked under her bonnet. Rather than deny it, she wrote a poem about the incident and circulated it as a pamphlet titled Verses from Madame Geneva's Lap. You ask if she regrets it. The woman shrugs. It sold well. The scholars don't agree on how deep this fashionable gin culture went. Some say it was just satire, exaggerated depictions meant to shame the upper class into sobering up. Others believe it was very real, an underground culture of tipsy elegance where ladies and gentlemen drank not to forget but to perform. A social costume made of blush, wit, and juniper. You sneak into a small theatre that evening, an off-script production house known for its irreverent performances. Tonight's feature, The Gin Duchess, a comedy in 3 acts where a noblewoman disguises herself as a gin seller to win the heart of a street poet. It's absurd, bawdy, and clearly mocking the very people sitting in the front row. Every time a bottle appears on stage, someone in the audience cheers. When the Duchess removes a flask from her garter in Act 2, a man near you whispers, "Just like my wife." After the show, the cast invites you backstage. You're handed a drink before you even sit down. The actress who played the Duchess is still in costume. Corset, powdered wig, gin bottle tucked into a ribbon at her waist. It's theatre, she says with a wink, but it's also life. We're all playing someone. As the party rolls on, the gossip heats up. You hear rumours of a certain countess who hosts gin suppers every Thursday. Guests are required to wear clothes made of materials soaked in gin. One woman caught fire, someone says with delight, but the dress smelled divine. You sip your drink and watch the room. Velvet coats, powdered faces, sly glances, glittering eyes. Everyone here is playing at control, but beneath the lace and laughter, you see it. The same weariness, the same edge. They might drink prettier, but they drink for the same reasons. Later you pass by a shop window displaying the latest in high society accessories. A gin-sipping spoon shaped like a serpent, a fan with tiny gin recipes printed between the folds, a brooch shaped like a gin cart. They're expensive, they're stylish, they're selling fast. You stop by Miss Thatcher's on your way home. She's in her dressing gown, carefully tying a silk ribbon around the neck of a new bottle. Presentation matters, she says, even when it's poison. You sit with her a while. Neither of you speaks. She pours 2 small glasses, not more. It's quiet. Outside, someone sings off key and a cat knocks over a bottle in the alley. You look down at your cup. It's beautiful. It's deadly. It's been both for a long time. If you think the theatre might offer a break from all this gin-soaked gloom, think again. Tonight, you head toward Drury Lane, hoping for a little culture, something with powdered wigs, elaborate set changes, and a plot that doesn't end with someone collapsing in an alley. You're craving Shakespeare, maybe some Mozart, or even one of those sentimental tragedies where everyone cries into their handkerchiefs and pretends to feel better afterward. What you get instead is far more chaotic. Outside the playhouse, the crowd's already thick and rowdy, clustered beneath oil-lit lanterns and bellowing for seats. You spot a man with a painted face offering flasks from inside his coat. "Pre-show sip," he cries. For nerves, for love, for not stabbing your neighbour during Act 3. People buy. Some drink before entering. Some smuggle it in their boots. One woman, slightly too loud, offers a swig from a hollowed-out opera glass. "The only way to watch a tragedy," she says, hiccuping, "is through a haze of gin and indifference." You follow the current into the building, grand, smoky, and packed. The scent of perfume battles against body odour and spilled spirits. The pit is a seething mess of tradesmen, sailors, and apprentices, with muddy boots and loose morals. The boxes are only slightly better, rich ladies fanning themselves, powdered gentlemen whispering about scandal, and the occasional nobleman pretending not to drink from a flask tucked into his cane. The play begins, but no one's really watching. A historical fact for you. During the height of the gin craze, London's theatres were a magnet for both entertainment and intoxication. The drinking didn't wait for the curtain call, it was baked into the experience. Vendors sold bottles in the aisles. Gin was served in the green rooms, the lobbies, even backstage. Some actors refused to perform without a pre-show tipple. One actor was rumoured to forget his lines unless he had exactly 3 ounces of juniper in his belly. The performance tonight is a comedy of errors. Literally. The actors trip over each other, miss cues, and deliver lines like they've just been told what a play is 10 minutes ago. Half the cast is clearly drunk. The leading man sways, gesturing dramatically with a bottle he's supposed to be hiding. Someone in the gallery shouts, "Give him another round, maybe he'll remember his lines." Laughter erupts. And then come the oranges. You'd heard the rumours, but now you see it for yourself. As soon as the crowd grows restless, the fruit starts flying. A poorly delivered soliloquy earns a hail of citrus. A misstep, orange to the chest. A slow scene, orange to the back of the head. The theatre becomes less a temple of art and more a contact sport. You glance up and spot Miss Thatcher in one of the side boxes, sipping calmly and laughing behind her fan. She notices you and raises her glass. You raise yours in reply, well, your empty hand anyway. You drained your flask during Act 1. At intermission, you wander backstage. The smell is incredible. Paint, powder, sweat, and gin. One actress adjusts her wig while drinking directly from a punch bowl. Second act's where it gets serious, she says, then belches into her sleeve. The stage manager, clearly out of his depth, is passed out on a prop chaise. Someone else is arguing about whether the sword fight should be postponed due to over-sloshed conditions. And it's not just the performers. You meet a playwright huddled in a corner, furiously editing the next scene with ink-stained hands and shaking fingers. They won't remember the lines, he mutters. No one ever does. Just give them noise and gin. Lots of gin. You ask if he drinks. Only when I care. I drink a lot. Here's your fringe fact. Some Georgian playwrights intentionally wrote scenes that could be improvised or skipped, knowing full well their actors would be drunk or the audience too rowdy to notice. One farce included a full minute of actors simply shouting "Gin! Gin! Gin!" while chasing each other in circles. The crowd went wild. You return to your seat for Act 2 and the play unravels gloriously. A romantic scene devolves into laughter when the heroine forgets her lines and substitutes nursery rhymes. The villain enters from the wrong wing, looks confused and walks back out. The crowd cheers anyway. A drunk man in the pit stands up, toasts the actors, and promptly falls over. And somehow, the play still ends with applause. The scholarly debate around Georgian theatre during the Gin Craze centres on whether this was high culture, ruined by low habits, or whether it was always a bit of both. Some argue that the theatre was the last public space where all classes mingled, and gin was simply the common language. Others claim it was the beginning of cultural decay, where art was drowned beneath a flood of cheap spirits and cheaper laughs. You suspect it's more complicated, because yes, it's messy, it's loud, it's often incoherent, but it's also alive. In a city full of grief and grind, the theatre offers something rare. Release, laughter, chaos. A place where everyone, rich or poor, sober or sloshed, can sit in the dark and forget themselves for a while. As you leave, the street outside is even louder than before. A man recites lines from the play while standing on a barrel. A woman flirts with an actor still in costume. A child juggles oranges while shouting, "Gin for all." The world is mad, the curtain's down, and no one's going home yet. You walk with the crowd, feeling the buzz of performance lingering in your bones. You don't remember the plot. You're not sure there was one, but you laughed. You clapped. You were part of something absurd and fleeting. And in Georgian London, that might be the closest thing to magic. You glance back at the theatre, windows aglow, laughter echoing, and think, maybe this city doesn't survive in spite of gin. Maybe it survives because of it. You wake up before dawn this time, not from thirst or cold or the familiar throb in your temples, but from silence. It's strange, almost sacred, this stillness. London is never quiet. There's always a scream, a clatter, a laugh, a hymn, a dog, a cough, a body collapsing somewhere in the fog. But now, in this sliver of calm between night's last echo and the city's first cough, you lie in bed and think, what if I didn't drink today? It's not a vow, not yet, just a thought, but it sits heavy. You rise slowly, the floorboards cool beneath your bare feet. Miss Thatcher's flat is still and dark, the bottle on the dresser full for once, untouched since last night. You glance at it. It glances back. You put on your coat and leave. Outside, the sky still smudged with stars. The city looks almost clean in this light, its sins not yet reawakened. You walk without purpose, letting the quiet guide you. No carts, no calls, just your boots on stone and the occasional crow watching you like it knows something you don't. Eventually you find yourself outside a modest building with a cracked wooden sign, the Society of Temperance and Self-Restoration. The lettering is careful, the paint flaking. Someone scratched "Good Luck" into the bottom corner. You stand there a while. You don't knock, but you do step inside. It smells like weak tea and damp wool. The room is small and plain, with a fireplace that's pretending to warm the place, and 3 mismatched chairs arranged in a tight circle. A man sits in one, middle-aged, hollow-eyed, but alert. His hands are folded tightly in his lap as if he's afraid of what they'll do if left unchecked. He nods to you, says nothing. A woman arrives a few minutes later, then another man. No one speaks right away. There's no ceremony, no chalkboard, no sermon, just a kettle on the hob and the sound of breathing, each of you holding something in your chest that's been screaming to get out. Finally someone speaks. "I didn't drink yesterday." It's the woman. Her voice is small but steady. "Me neither," says the second man, blinking hard. "Still want to, but I didn't." The first man clears his throat. "I poured mine into the Thames." They all look at you. You swallow. "I haven't had any since last night." It counts. They nod. Here's your historical fact. By the mid-18th century, small temperance groups began to emerge in response to the chaos of the gin craze. They were rarely official, often local and loosely organised, with no grand agenda except one shared hope: that people might help each other survive their own worst instincts. These groups were mocked, ignored, and occasionally attacked by those who saw them as judgmental nuisances. But for the few who joined, they offered something the city rarely gave: gentleness. You stay for a while. No one talks about salvation. No one hands you a pamphlet. They just sit, sip tea, and talk when they feel like it. Some are on day 2, some on day 20. One woman says she hasn't had a drop in over a year. She doesn't say it proudly. She says it carefully, like she's afraid the number might disappear if she breathes too hard. The fringe fact for today: a few Londoners created sobriety tokens, small wooden chips or coins carried as daily reminders. They had mottos carved into them, things like "still standing" or "one day dry." You see one in the woman's hand. She rubs her thumb across it over and over like a worry stone. Eventually the group disbands. Quietly, gently. A nod here, a smile there. No promises, just hope. As you step back into the street, the city is waking. The butchers and the bakers and the fishmongers and the gin sellers, all stretching into their daily dance. You make it to midday without drinking. You pass familiar corners, familiar bottles, familiar voices. One of them calls your name. You don't stop. You buy tea. It's awful, thin as broth and tasting faintly of tin, but it doesn't burn going down, and it doesn't cloud your mind. You sit on a bench and let the sunlight, thin, grey, half-hearted, warm your face. It feels like the world is trying to shake off a hangover too. Of course, not everyone approves. Later that day, a man you know, barely, grabs your arm and asks why you're walking funny. You tell him you're sober. He laughs like it's a punchline. "Who are you trying to impress?" he scoffs. "The preacher? Your mother?" He waves a bottle under your nose. "Just one sip. You want to, you ache to, but you don't." Here's where the scholars start arguing. Some say the gin craze ended not because of law or reform, but because people got tired. Tired of the pain, the loss, the chaos. Tired of waking up on floors and forgetting where they left their shoes, or their children. Others argue the economy shifted, grain prices rose, gin became more expensive, and people simply drank less because they couldn't afford to drink more. Maybe both are true. You walk back to Miss Thatcher's. She's reading. She glances up, eyes narrowed slightly. "You look clear," she says. "I didn't drink today," you reply. She doesn't smile, but she pours you a cup of tea instead of gin. Sits across from you. No words. Just a flicker of something softer than usual. That night, you lie awake. Your body aches, your head spins, your hands itch for something they can't name, but your mind is quiet. Not peaceful, not yet, but quiet. And in this city, that's something rare enough to count. You don't last. It's not dramatic. There's no collapse in the street, No violent stumble back into the arms of a bottle. It's quiet, slippery, almost kind. It happens on the fourth day, just after dusk, when the city feels especially grimy and close. Rain has been falling in misty curtains all afternoon, turning the alleys into veins of filth, and the sky into one long, low-hanging bruise. You're wet, you're cold, you're tired of tea that tastes like boiled shoe leather, and when a man walks by with a tray of steaming gin toddies, you reach out without thinking. It burns going down, but oh, how it sings. And just like that, the streak is broken. No fanfare, no thunderclap, just the warm, familiar slip back into something you thought you'd left behind. You wipe your mouth with the back of your hand and keep walking. One step, one drink, one excuse at a time. Later, you try to tell yourself it didn't count. It was only one. It was raining. I was cold. But those words are smoother than the gin. They slip too easily through your teeth. And deep down, you already know what comes next. Once the door is open, it never stays open just a little. Here's your historical fact. For many in the 18th century, the idea of quitting gin wasn't even part of the conversation. There were no 12-step programs, no detox clinics, no language for addiction as we understand it now. The best you could do was cut back, or hide it, or lie. You might try abstaining during Lent. You might swear off gin on Sundays. But full sobriety, that was for saints, and London didn't make saints. You stop by the temperance meeting that week. You sit outside the door, bottle in hand, listening through the thin walls as someone inside says, "I drank again." The others murmur their sympathy, their forgiveness. You think about going in. You don't. Instead, you take another swig and walk away. By the end of the week, you're back in the rhythm, bottles hidden, stories rehearsed, mornings blurred, nights vanished. Miss Thatcher doesn't say anything. She just starts keeping the good glassware out of reach again. The truth is, relapse doesn't feel like falling. It feels like floating. Like coming home to a fire that was never really out. You know the weight of the cup in your hand. You know how to walk with just the right amount of sway. You know how to laugh off the tremors. You've done it all before. Here's a fringe detail. There were so many gin relapses in the mid-17th century that some reformers began tracking them in ledgers, recording each person who fell back into the fog. One reverend called it the second drowning, and wrote that it was worse than the first because the soul resists with the memory of clarity and still loses. His pamphlet sold poorly. You meet others like you, dozens, hundreds, if you count every slouched figure on the corner and every barmaid with hollow eyes. One man tells you he's been sober 4 times. Each time, I forget how to be empty, he says. Then I drink to remember. A woman says she swore off gin until her baby died, then swore it back on like an oath. It's the only thing that quiets the ghosts, she murmurs. The scholarly debate stumbles here, trying to apply modern frameworks to a city that didn't yet have the vocabulary of addiction. Was it disease? Was it weakness? Was it just London being London? One argument suggests the city itself was addictive. Its noise, its chaos, its constant threat of unravelling. Maybe gin was just a response, a symptom, a way of speaking a language no one had taught you. You start avoiding mirrors again. Not out of shame, really, but out of indifference. There's nothing new in your face, just the same old shadows under your eyes and the same dull spark that flickers out after a drink or 2, or 6. One evening you run into the woman from the temperance circle, the one with the sobriety token. She's standing by a fruit stall staring at the oranges like she's never seen one before. When she sees you, she gives a tight smile. "Still dry?" she asks. You hesitate. She nods before you can answer. "It's hard," she says. "Harder when you think it shouldn't be." You walk together for a while. No destination. Just 2 ghosts haunting the same streets. She tells you she's back on day 1. Again. "I've got 20 day ones under my belt," she jokes. "I'm building a collection." You ask her why she keeps trying. She thinks for a long time, then says, "Because the world doesn't stop hurting when I stop drinking. But I can hear it better. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's worth something." You don't go home with her. You don't make any promises. But you toss your bottle into a gutter that night and don't pick up another. For now, that's the strange truth of the gin craze. There are no neat endings, no hero's journey, just starts and stops, good weeks and bad mornings. Relapse is as much a part of the story as reform, and for most Londoners it wasn't about quitting forever. It was about surviving today, and maybe tomorrow. You lie in bed that night, flat on your back, stone sober and shaking. It's not peace, it's not hell, it's just you, awake, present, listening to the rain tattooing the roof like it's trying to scrub the city clean. It won't succeed. But you'll still be here in the morning. You wake to coughing, not your own this time, but a deep, wet rasp echoing from somewhere just outside the window. The kind of cough that sounds like it's clawing its way up from the base of the lungs, trying to escape a body that's had enough. You sit up slowly, bones creaking like old timber, and pull aside the curtain. A man sits on the curb across the street, doubled over, a bottle balanced between his feet. He's not begging, not moving, just there, breathing in bursts. The morning air stinks of chimney smoke, rotting cabbage, and cold gin spilled from someone's night pocket. You're not sure if it's day or some pale imitation of it, but either way, London's already awake and crawling forward like a wounded animal. The carts clatter. The street cries begin. Somewhere nearby a bottle smashes, followed by laughter. You're sober again for the moment, still shaky, still cautious. You're treating your body like an injured dog, gently, suspiciously, and with the understanding that it might bite back at any moment. But your head is clearer today, and you've decided to do something you haven't in weeks. Walk through the city with your eyes open. So you start with the corners you usually avoid. You pass the tenement block with the missing roof and see children rooting through trash for scraps. One of them is chewing on a shoe. Another offers you a thimble of something that smells like paint thinner and dares you to drink it. You don't. You give him a coin and feel ridiculous. Then it's down to the workhouses, those towering monuments to survival with dignity stripped out. The queue snakes around the corner. Most are quiet. Some weep openly. A woman is turned away because her paperwork is 2 days out of date. She screams after the porter. No one blinks. You watch a man carry his mother into the infirmary. She's barely conscious, her hands curled like claws. The nurse tells him they can't take her if she's drunk. He pleads, offers to wait with her. They close the door in his face. You want to believe these are the worst cases, the exceptions, but the longer you walk, the more you see. Gin isn't just a drink. It's architecture, it's currency, it's policy. It's laced into the mortar of this city like mould. You stop by a cemetery wall, low and crumbling, with a sign nailed haphazardly. Common burials. No markers. Inside, a gravedigger hums to himself as he leans on his shovel. You ask him if gin sends many his way. He spits, every damn day. Here's your historical fact. By the 1750s, gin had become one of the leading indirect causes of death in London. Not always by overdose, though that certainly happened, but by the chain of misery it created. Malnutrition, exposure, violence, infection. One death often looked like another, but if you pulled the thread long enough, you'd find the bottle waiting at the end. City reports from the time began listing gin-related as a contributing factor, next to causes like fever, childbed, and melancholia. Doctors started keeping tallies, so did priests, and no one agreed on what to do about it. Which leads you to today's open question. Was London failing its people, or were its people failing London? You find yourself in a council chamber later that afternoon. Not because you were invited, but because the door was ajar and you wandered in on instinct. It smells of old paper and expensive shoes. A group of men, wigs perfectly curled, sit in rows arguing over a new proposed gin tax. One man stands and bellows, "We cannot legislate sobriety." Another replies, "Then let's legislate shame." They go in circles. Someone brings up the recent riot in Holborn, when a gin shop refused to close and was burned to the ground by a mob of locals convinced it was cursed. Someone else mentions a vicar who tried to offer free soup in exchange for poured-out gin and was nearly drowned in his own pot. You sit in the back, unnoticed, as the great minds of the city debate how to fix the thing they spent decades breaking. Raise taxes, ban it outright, regulate distillers, fund treatment centres. Each idea is met with groans, and none of them mention poverty. Here's your fringe fact. One desperate reformer suggested adding something foul-tasting to all gin, like soot or pig bile, so people would be physically repulsed. The plan was rejected on grounds that it might interfere with commerce. You leave the meeting disgusted but not surprised. As evening falls, you take the long way home. You pass the same alley you woke up in 2 weeks ago. It still stinks. Someone else is lying there now, mouth open, eyes closed, bottle tipped over in the gutter. You don't know if he's asleep or dead. You don't check. You stop at the apothecary and buy something bitter, something that tastes like discipline, not because you believe in it, but because you're trying. The shopkeeper nods like he's seen it all before. You return to Miss Thatcher's and find her in the sitting room, feet up, hair pinned lazily, sipping something warm. You ask if it's gin. She raises her cup. Tea. Swear it. You sit. She watches you. Rough day? You nod. This city's killing itself slowly. She shrugs. It always has. You tell her about the graveyard, the child with the shoe, the councilmen with their powdered outrage. She listens. Then she leans forward, eyes sharp. Here's the truth no one wants to say out loud, she says. Gin didn't cause all this. Gin is just what people reach for when nothing else is left. She tops off her tea. The problem isn't the bottle. It's the world that makes you need one. You don't reply. There's nothing to add. You lie awake again that night, your hands calm for once, your head full of stories. You've seen too much to be angry and too tired to be hopeful, but you're not numb. Not yet. You hear a fox scream in the alley, and a carriage roll past and someone coughing in the next room. You're still here, and tomorrow the city will ask again if you want to forget, and you'll answer, one way or another. The morning comes cold and colourless. A grey sheet drapes over the city, blurring everything into smudges of slate and soot. The Thames crawls by like it's hungover, sluggish and bloated, dragging along the broken reflections of buildings and clouds. You stand at the edge of a dock near Suffolk, staring out across the water as dockhands shout over crates and gulls, screech like they're being paid to complain. Today feels different. You're not sure why. Maybe it's the way the wind cuts cleaner, or how the streets seem less cruel than usual. Or maybe it's just that your bones don't ache as much this morning. Your hands aren't shaking, you had tea and bread and it stayed down. The bottle's still on the shelf where you left it last night. Unopened. You walk. Through the market where sellers call your name, real or imagined. Through the churchyard where muddy gravestones lean like drunks at closing time. Past the distillery where barrels wait to be filled and carts wait to carry them into 1,000 other lives. Everything's the same, but you're not. Because now you know it. You know what gin really is. Not just a drink or a fashion or a symptom. It's a citywide compromise, a quiet surrender. It's what happens when the noise of life becomes too loud and the silence too sharp. It's what people choose when the day doesn't offer anything else worth reaching for. It's a friend, a poison, a prayer, a warm room in a cold world, and it's everywhere. You pass a pub with a broken door swinging in the wind. Inside, men laugh too loud and lean too far, and a woman sings off-key while pouring gin into cracked mugs. No one looks ashamed. No one seems free either, just busy, just burning time. Here's your historical fact. By the time the Gin Act of 1751 was passed, following several failed attempts, the government finally found a way to slow the flood. The law restricted gin sellers, required licenses, raised taxes, and cracked down on unregulated distilleries. But most importantly, it framed gin not as a fashionable indulgence or moral failing, but as a social crisis rooted in poverty and neglect. It didn't stop the drinking overnight. Nothing could. But it began the long, slow process of pulling the city back from the edge. You walk through a square where a preacher stands on a crate, shouting about repentance and redemption. His breath fogs in the air, and his Bible thuds like a hammer as he raises it again and again. But what catches your eye is the girl standing beside him, handing out cups of hot soup. Her coat is too thin, her hands red with cold, but she smiles as she offers a bowl to a man whose eyes are so sunken they might collapse. No one's cured today, but someone eats. You wander past a printer's shop where pamphlets line the windows. One reads, "To Tame the Spirit, a Guide to Sobriety in an Unforgiving World." Another, "Death and Mother Geneva, a Moral Tragedy in 3 Acts." Someone's selling stories. Someone else is trying to change them. You step into the apothecary again, the same one from a few days ago. This time, you ask about bitters, not for drink, but for the body. Something to help the sleep come easier. The shopkeeper doesn't ask questions, just hands over a wrapped bundle and says, "You'll need patience. More than I can sell." Here's your fringe fact. Some recovering drinkers in the late 18th century started their own presses. They printed journals, self-help guides, and even satirical sketches mocking their old habits. Cartoons of themselves sprawled under tables, stories of lost weeks and worse choices. They laughed at their own past as a form of exorcism. It didn't save everyone, but it helped some remember why they chose to try again. As you walk home, you find yourself humming. You don't recognize the tune. It's probably not real, but it's soft and strange and entirely yours. The streets are still filthy. The fog still presses in. But for the first time in a long time, you're not just surviving London. You're walking through it on your own terms. The scholarly debates about the gin craze continue, long after the last bottle's smashed. Some historians focus on policy. Was it the taxes or the licenses that worked? Others blame class tension, urban sprawl, or religious decline. A few argue it wasn't about gin at all, but about fear. Fear of the poor, fear of women, fear of the future, and they're probably all right, in their own polite academic way. But you've been here. You've seen the cracked lips and emptied eyes. You've felt the shakes, the rage, the relief. You've stood in the middle of a city drunk on despair, and you've poured yourself a cup just to feel level. The gin craze wasn't a historical blip. It was a mirror. London looked into it and saw itself. Ugly, hungry, desperate, and for once didn't look away. You return to Miss Thatcher's one last time. She's in the same chair, same drink in her hand. She offers you one, and this time you say no. Not loudly, not forever, just for tonight. She doesn't push, she just nods. You'll figure it out, she says, or you won't. But either way, I'll be here. You sit beside her. The fire crackles, the bottle stays on the shelf. You fall asleep upright, not because you passed out, but because the room is warm and your head is clear, and for the first time silence isn't terrifying, it's restful. Outside, London groans forward. Same old ghosts, same old fog. But you're still here, and you're still trying. That's more than enough. You've made it to the edge of the city's longest night. The gin's still there, bottles clinking in back rooms, sloshing in pockets, passed like secrets from hand to hand. But tonight, for once, it doesn't have its hands around your throat. You're not fixed, you're not healed, but you're still standing. And in Georgian London, that's a miracle in itself. You lie in bed, listening to the muffled hum of the world outside your window. A cart rumbles past. A woman sings something low and mournful. The wind rattles the shutter. It's not peaceful exactly, but it's familiar now, and in a strange way, comforting. The days ahead won't be easy. Gin doesn't forget. It waits. It finds new shapes, new names. But you've learned to see it now. Not just the drink, but the thing beneath it. The ache, the emptiness, the quiet scream you carry around your ribs. And knowing that? That's something. You think of all the faces you've passed, the people who held out a hand or a story or a drink, the ones who slipped away, the ones still trying. You think of Miss Thatcher, of her calm defiance, her quiet rules, her deep and knowing laugh. You think of the preacher with no answers, the graveyard porter, the girl with too thin gloves offering soup to ghosts. You think of yourself. Not the worst days, not just the ones soaked in regret and rain and rot, but the good ones too. The tea that stayed down, the breath that didn't shake, the walk that didn't end in a ditch, the morning you woke up and didn't immediately reach for something to make the world disappear. Those moments matter, because if the gin craze taught the world anything, it's that people will do anything to survive a city that forgets how to care for them. They'll drink, steal, dance, scream, sing, dream, collapse, stand again. They'll lace their lives with poison just to make the pain sing in a different key, and somehow, despite everything, some of them, you, will make it through. Maybe not clean, but clear. London isn't sober. It never will be. But maybe, just maybe, you don't have to drown in it anymore. Maybe you can float. Maybe you can walk. Maybe you can laugh. And maybe, when someone hands you a bottle, you'll know how to say no. Or how to say, not today. Now the sky outside your window is beginning to change. The dark is lifting just a little, and a thin silver line cuts across the horizon like a promise whispered through the fog. The city is about to wake again, but you've already lived its story, tasted its sweetness, choked on its bitterness, stumbled through its alleyways and crawled your way back. So breathe deep, rest your eyes, and let the quiet settle, finally, like dust after a storm. You've been through the heart of the gin craze, seen its filth and its fury, its laughter and its lies, and you're still here. That's the whole point, isn't it? You're still here.